Okay, we are on. After a few minutes of technical difficulties, we are here live from the JNS Jerusalem headquarters. My name is Alex Traiman. I'm the Managing Director and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of JNS, Jewish News Syndicate, and I am joined by an esteemed panel of colleagues and friends for the third elections in less than 12 months here in the state of Israel. I'm joined by on my left side, it's not indicative of political leanings, Israel Kasnett, JNS diplomatic correspondent. To my immediate right, Harow, a tour guide, an activist, and podcaster, the Rejuvenation podcast on the landofisrael.com network. Everybody should listen to that. And also Daniel Seaman, who is now working for the
Movement for Governability and Democracy.
Movement for Governability and Democracy here in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. We're already getting some indications from exit polls that things might be different than what has been predicted, which is interesting because for the last year, we've been stuck in an electoral deadlock. Just over a year ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called early elections after his coalition of 67 members shrank down to 61 with the resignation of Avigdor Lieberman, who at the time was the defense minister and is the chairman of the Israel Beiteinu party. He decided that he didn't want to support Netanyahu's government anymore. He resigned the government, and it basically started a cycle that led us into elections. And since that time, we've now had two successive elections that failed to produce a parliamentary majority, either for Prime Minister Netanyahu and his right-wing and religious bloc, as well as for challenger Benny Gantz of the Blue and White Party, a former IDF chief of staff, and his primarily secular center-left political bloc that also includes the Labor Party and the Meretz parties, potentially also Israel Beiteinu. We'll try to unwrap as much of this as possible. We'll be here until the exit polls hit, which will be at 10 p.m. Israel time, which is 3 p.m. Eastern. And but first, before we do that, I just wanted to say a couple words about JNS. If you're watching now, perhaps you've noticed that JNS has continuously emerged as a high-quality source of news and analysis. We are trying every day to improve the quality and the quantity of our coverage, and we continue to do that with the help of you here and with the help of our readers at home. But first, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who JNS is. We were founded in 2011 by our publishers, Josh and Amelia Katzen and Russell Pergament. Our editor-in-chief is Jonathan Tobin. Our managing editor, Karen Smilk. Our news editor, Sean Savage. Here in Israel, we have our Jerusalem copy editor, Ben Gale, our deputy online editor, Ariel Ben Solomon, our staff writer, Malka Fleischer, our Jerusalem correspondent, Eli Rudy. Of course, I should also mention in Washington, our incredible Washington, D.C. correspondent, who's at APAC as we speak, Jackson Richmond, and also a few of our other correspondents that we have. We have an incredible pool of correspondents, including our political correspondent, Dov Whitman, who's on, I believe he's on ILTV right now, and also our military correspondent, Yaakov Lapin, who continues to provide us with incredible first-rate updates of the capabilities and some of the inside look into what happens in the IDF. I also want to, before we forget, thank our producer and cameraman, Sasha Gorev, who's helping us here. So that's that. Right. So the question is, how did we get to a third election? You know, it's, I was in the poll booths earlier today, and there's lines for people to vote, but people are kind of shaking their heads. And I was coming in with the idea, well, this is just great because for centuries, Jews have never had the opportunity to decide who was going to be governing them. And True. We do that. You know, we finally have a Jewish democracy. And when there seems to be a little bit of a problem, so the mandate is actually returned to the public. So I was very happy about it. I said that Election Day is a day of joy for the Jewish people, even if it's the third one in less than a year. But a lot of people are not so happy.
I think it's not the elections they're not happy about, it's everything that's around it, because it really brings things to the extreme. People get very emotional, families are divided, friends are fighting, so if it happens once in 4 years, we survive it. This has happened 3 times in less than a year, and that is really stretching everybody's patience, and you look at this, I try not to be too nasty towards friends of mine and try. But then they'll say, I've been able to hold back a lot. I said to myself, remember, they're still your friends. In the last elections, the weeks before the last elections, in September, we had a gathering of comrades and friends of mine from the First Lebanon War. We hadn't seen each other for 37 years, and this was a week before the elections. And we were sitting there, former paratroopers, kibbutznikim and moshavnikim, and from the cities, and Ashkenazi and Sephardic and ultra-religious and the secular, the Jew and Arab, the entire map of the state of Israel. And we were sitting there, and we could care less about our differences. And it was a nice reminder. Remember, it doesn't matter what we think and what we're fighting about. We have those who don't care about our differences, and they'll kill us all equally. And we have to remember that. We can bring it to, we can debate and argue, but let's not forget what this is all about. And you were talking before about the fact that we have this right to be finally Jews and Israelis in our own country. So we have these rights, so let's not forget it and take it for granted. We should never take it for granted.
Also to remember, I think, that we are a family
Right.
and also a nation of tribes, 12 tribes that sit together, which means that there's always going to be political differences. I mean, in Israel, politics is like sports, and you have your team that you like, and you have your politicians that you like, and those that you don't. But at the end of the day, Israelis have been doing this now for 75 years, 70 years. So, we're kind of used to it, but maybe 3 times in 1 year is a little bit much, even for Israelis.
Well, I have a different take than Danny had. If I fall asleep on the table today, it's just because I came in from AIPAC just a few hours ago, and maybe it's because of that I say it a little differently in terms of the emotions happening in Israel. Because in the States, they're really going nuts emotionally.
Really?
I mean, it's like when it comes to the elections, the guy you don't like is Satan. So coming back to Israel, I was just there for the weekend, is a little bit refreshing, because at least, you might not like the other person, and there are some people on the extreme who are going a little bit crazy, but it's a more normal kind of thing. My sense of what's happening here in the elections and why people are just tired is because we're not sure that this will be the last one. There's this sense of abeyance. We've lived for a year here in Israel without a budget being passed. And so on the day-to-day, forget the bigger picture of the government, different things haven't been funded the way they should. Everything is kind of stuck.
But the economy grew in the past year.
So maybe this is a good idea. No, but I think there's really that sense of let's just have a decision, let's just have a government. There's things that have to be done on the day-to-day. There's roads that have to be fixed. There's kindergartens that have to be, extra camps that have to be run, and little things like that make the difference. And I think that's the sense here in Israel is we're not sure if we're not going to number 4, because it just seems like we're in the same situation and it's going to be the same split. That now 61 looks like a great number to have. That's wow, right?
That's a great point.
Is now the goal.
Right.
So I think that's where we're sitting. If everyone knew today going into the voting booth that this would be it and we would really now go for it, I think a lot of people would have bounded in with more enthusiasm.
So I'd like to add on what they said, and that's the attitudes of voters. And compared to America and Israel, you have actual civil discourse. It's not, the enemy is not, the person you're not voting for is not the enemy, is not the worst. Here it's, it's more just maybe perhaps the lesser of two evils, or, the better alternative. But it doesn't have that nastiness that in America you have today. And back to your original question was, how do we get here? It's clear, maybe now more than in past years, that there's a more clear divide among Israeli society. You have a larger chunk on the right, a larger chunk perhaps on the left, and sort of a bunch of undecideds in the middle. And it's kind of evened out, which is why we continue to get back to this place where we're at, which is no one's winning the election because no one's got the clear numbers to really gain that majority coalition. So hopefully tonight will be different.
So I want to take a step back and let's unwind how we got to this situation, right? I mentioned in the beginning that that just about a year ago, Avigdor Lieberman took his 6-member Yisrael Beitenu party out of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. The government had a year until the elections, which were supposed to be only in November. Just 3 months ago was when the first elections were supposed to happen. the resignation of Lieberman left the government with 61 members. At the time, that was considered to be a very narrow government, a very slim majority of one.
Amazing how perspectives change.
Which can be a precarious situation because there have been times in the past where if there's only 61 members of the government and somebody's sick or somebody can't attend, you literally have to drag somebody from the sickbed or from the hospital. Or I remember Yehuda Glick was sitting Shiva, and they had to. His wife has just passed away, and they had to.
Kokovelli just had a baby.
Right. So it's a little bit precarious. At the same time, it's a majority. Now, what looms over all these elections, and we will get to it a little bit later in the program, are the corruption charges that are being leveled against the Prime Minister by the Attorney General. 3 separate cases of corruption. We'll get to it in a little bit, but. There was a sense from Benjamin Netanyahu that he wanted to renew his mandate before the Attorney General would level charges, potentially indict the Prime Minister. And so he decided to call for early elections.
Because he thought he would benefit from that.
Right, he thought that he would renew his mandate and that he would send a strong message to the judicial system that the people support his continued premiership, and so that is why he decided to.
Well, he did increase the number of seats a year ago in what was it, April? In April last year, they did go from 31 to 35. So he did prove his point. That's there.
Right. Netanyahu went from 30 seats in the previous government to 35. That's right. Was a massive increase in the number of seats, the most seats that Netanyahu had ever received in his history as the Prime Minister, and a 5-seat increase. It's pretty momentous. And the right-wing bloc that had included Avigdor Lieberman's party received 65 mandates. And I remember at the time writing that it was a landslide for Israel's right wing because the right wing and religious parties had received 65 mandates. The center-left parties had received 45 mandates. The Arabs had 15 mandates, but the Arabs have historically never joined any government to the right or the left, and that's something we can talk about a little bit later as well. So it really seemed like the country was pushing very strongly in a center-right religious direction, and it was a landslide. Except that Avigdor Lieberman, who resigned from Netanyahu's previous government, refused to join the right-wing government, leaving Netanyahu with only 60 mandates. And at that time, Netanyahu decided that rather than try to present a minority government of 60, which at the time now, thinking back, he might have done it, and maybe we would have not been in this situation at all. He decided to, once again, take the mandate back to the voters and see if he could get over the hump to 61. And as we know, in the September elections, the right-wing bloc, without Lieberman's party, scored worse than it did in April, receiving only 55 mandates in the end. Now those groups united as a bloc. Benny Gantz, the challenger of Netanyahu, was not able to form a government either in either case, and even though they discussed all kinds of unity arrangements, rotation deals, in the end it didn't work, basically because Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party, their ideology is to replace Netanyahu. So if that's your ideology is to replace Netanyahu, you can't sit alongside Netanyahu. And unity didn't work, it didn't happen, and here we are now in March on the third set of elections in less than a year.
And what's going to make a difference, of course, is the percentages of people coming out to vote this time, which was lower last time than the first
especially
time.
among the right-wingers.
Yes.
Much lower than in April.
Actually, in September, it was slightly higher than in April.
Right, but the right wing came out less than in the previous election.
Yeah.
They sort of thought it was a done deal, and they thought that there's no
That's
reason
gonna
for
be
them to
the
show up. The right wing are going to win anyway.
Big
And
mistake.
Now, people in the Likud camp really believe that voter turnout is what will determine the election, one way or the other. I have here Coronas on the table because we know that there's a coronavirus
We love
scare
Mexico.
going around, and so in order to inoculate us
we're not getting any money from them or anything.
No. But I brought it
But
here
it's
as
funny.
a prop because just the country actually set up 12 polling stations specifically, rather 16 special polling stations specifically for the thousands of people. There's over 5,000 Israelis that are currently on quarantine regarding coronavirus.
Not ill.
Not ill.
Not ill.
Quarantine.
Quarantine.
Right,
Under
just
self-quarantine.
quarantine to make sure that.
Why? Because Israelis travel all over the world, right? Israelis go to China, Israelis go to ski in Italy. Not so many Israelis go to Iran, where there's been known cases of coronavirus, but basically,
No, the
anybody-
one Israeli who did contract the disease got it in Italy. He
Right.
came back from Italy
Well, just
and he
on a-
infected his wife.
So just on a personal note, I have a son who's about to graduate medical school in Italy next week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we can have a discussion about affirmative action, which is why he and thousands of other Israelis are
Right.
studying in Europe, but let's leave that for another time. My husband and I can't go to his graduation.
Yeah.
I mean, a
Right.
Jewish
Yeah.
mother's nightmare, right? Your son is graduating, is becoming a doctor. My husband himself is a doctor, and we can't go, not because we're afraid
Wait,
of
wait,
getting
you're the
sick.
stereotypical Jew. Your son, the doctor.
But we can't go not because we're afraid of getting sick, but because we would be put in quarantine for 14 days after we got home. And even though my husband said it's a great opportunity to clean for Passover, still, neither of us want to do that. I'm a tour guide, he's a doctor, we can't sit home for 14 days. So we're not going.
Her husband's my doctor. I don't want
Look
him to
how
be.
pretty he looks, by
Yes,
the
I just
way.
had my medical
Yeah.
exams. I'm perfect.
As of this morning, I understand that there have been 7 individuals that have tested positive for
Right.
coronavirus
Yeah.
since the outbreak in the state of Israel, but yet over 5,000 people on quarantine. I saw some pictures of the polling sites.
Most of them are voters.
Yeah.
You see the people that are working the polling stations, they're
Hazmat.
outside, by the way, they're
Yeah.
not inside, they're outside in open air, they're wearing like
supposed to be.
full hazmat
Hazmat
suits.
suits.
Yeah.
Every vote's going into like a plastic bag. So Israel's taking it seriously because
Very
we
seriously.
don't want coronavirus
Yeah.
here. The only coronas that we want are right in front of us.
Beer.
Exactly.
If somebody can open these
The
at one
drinkable
point,
kind.
that'll be great.
No more.
Maybe if
At
if
10
we
o'clock.
get to 61 on one side or another, we can celebrate
We'll drink
with
for
with
some
The end of the elections.
I also brought some ice cream outside because there's a saying in Hebrew, Pam Shlishit Glida. The third time, like third time's the charm, and Israel's third time is ice cream. So I think the ice cream is melting, but maybe we'll get to some of that. Now I wanted to mention something that Ruby Rivlin, the president of Israel, he said when he went to cast his votes today. He said he called on the people to vote and to end the political deadlock. He said, "This is normally a festive day, but the truth is that I don't feel celebratory. I only feel a sense of deep shame when I face you, my fellow citizens. We don't deserve another awful and grubby election campaign like the one that ends today, and we don't deserve this never-ending instability. We deserve a government that works for us." Hey, how do you guys feel about that?
I think he's right about. I don't know if he's right about the word shame. I don't know if shame is really the correct
Yeah.
word for a third time going for elections. But he's right in the sense that it would be great if we had a country that was a little more stable and had a better system. Coalition system, obviously, as you can see, is very complicated. That's not going to change, to my knowledge. So it looks like we're heading into many years of possible instability when we get to
But maybe
election
this
day.
is
So
a push for electoral reform.
it
Maybe this
would
is
be
talking
great.
about for decades.
Correct.
And maybe this is like, okay, like we have to do something different here.
it
This
would be
can't
great.
go
I
on.
wish it would.
If we have a government, they can vote on electoral reform.
Right.
It's part of the problem.
What word
But-
should he have used? What do you
No, but it's nice for him accusing the politicians. It's very easy to do that. But a democracy has 3 official levels, branches: judicial, legislative,
Executive.
and the executive. But there's also the fourth estate, the journalism. And I think that Israel has been failed not only by its politicians, it's also been failed by the legal system, certainly by the legal system that's trying to take over more and more responsibilities that should be left to the legislator, who represents us, the people. But also the media have failed not only miserably, but they've also conducted a campaign that has been one-sided against the government, which in many ways has heated up the debate in Israel, have hidden information. I know people in the United States are also facing the same kind of situation as the fake news epidemic. I call Israel the cradle of fake news. It all started here, that whole breaking of standards, of professional standards. But in Israel, it has been totally, I blame a lot of this, the disinformation going out to delegitimize the duly elected government of Netanyahu by the media in Israel, and continuing to even till yesterday. Yesterday there was some horrible news, horrific news that came out against the candidate that nobody knew about. We're talking about last year. Last year, he wasn't even a member of Knesset, Gantz. And they've elevated him to a status of being the future leader of the state of Israel. Now, this is not a normal country on any level, but we all know that Israel has challenges and issues that no other country deals with. And you need experienced government. Now, I'm not disqualifying him.
And Gantz was a former chief of staff of the IDF.
Well, you know what? He could have been, but there may be debates about that as well. Head of a chief of staff of a military does not qualify you to be a good politician. I was very good at what I did when I worked with Israeli public diplomacy. Doesn't make me eligible for anything else. There are good football players, good baseball players. They're very good at what they do. To be very good at being a politician, it requires experience, especially if you want to run the country. Now, a lot of people were drawn to that because of something new. And they were also, what was brought to the table was, they're not corrupt. This is a new direction. And you're finding out very slowly that there's a lot of corruption there as well. And beyond that, other things of morality that have not been challenged by the media and that should be first and foremost done by the media. And that has not been done in Israel. So Israelis have been failed, with all due respect to the president of the state of Israel, Rivlin. Him pointing the finger at the politicians is the easy way to do it. He should have been pointing the fingers also at the media, who have failed miserably, and also the judicial
It's
system.
important to point out also that Rivlin was a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, but is certainly not an ally of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Right?
And that shouldn't be his role. He should be apolitical, and he has also failed miserably at performing his duties as he should be.
But that's a little bit of a theme, isn't it? People that at one point or another were either inside the Likud party or were advisors or aides or colleagues of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that have since defected either from his office or from his party or from his coalition, right? You have a number of people in the Israeli political system that simply don't want to work with Netanyahu anymore. Right?
Well, that's the whole ideology of blue and white, is Rak lo Netanyahu, Rak lo Bibi, just not Bibi. And that's been coming out. You had, like when the deal of the century was announced, you had Yael German, who's part of his party, talking about basically another, whatever you want to call it, Hitnakut, like another, I hate using the word another destruction. Like Gaza worked so well,
I like that.
Destroying the homes and the Jewish communities in Gaza, let's repeat it in Judea and Samaria. So they quickly shut her down. But Gantz himself last week said, apropos what you just mentioned, that he feels the judiciary should be more important than the legislative branch. And I'm like, wow. And this isn't a democracy, where, as you said, this is the whole point, is that the people have a voice. And maybe that's what's frightening about someone who was the chief of the army. And the army has really mythic status here in Israel, and for very good reason. The IDF is an incredible army, and the reason that we can all sit here safely and worry about the ice cream melting and talking to our audience is because we know that there are soldiers all the time doing day and night 24/7.
And there are sons and our
and
brothers and our
there are our children. However, someone who's used to giving orders is not necessarily somebody that can work in a democratic field where you have to work with people.
Right. It's a little bit different when you have a top-down system, which is basically both how the army and also how the judicial system works,
yes.
and yet a sort of bottom-up people's legislature, and then also coalitions. And I think that we should move back a little bit, because I think that there's a lot of people that are watching and want to understand, why don't you just pick your prime minister the way we in America pick a president, right? It just doesn't work that way. There's no direct elections in Israel for a prime minister, and there's no direct elections for specific representatives in the legislative houses, right? In Israel, we have one legislative house, which has 120 members. It's a parliament of 120 Knesset members, right? And so what happens is, right, if anybody wants to take over, we can, right?
You don't vote for people.
You don't vote for a person.
Right, so each party basically selects its slate of Knesset members that will enter the Knesset based on the number of votes, percentage of votes that party receives. Now, the way this works in every party is different. In the Likud party, for example, there is a democratic primary to select every member from the chairman of the party all the way down the list to see who will be on the Knesset slate. They're basically the only party that does that right now. The Labor Party also had primaries. However, the Labor Party in this iteration has merged together with the longtime far left-wing Meretz party, and then the chairman of
Skip the
those
primary,
parties,
right.
decided amongst
Right.
themselves how the Knesset seats would be split up, and that actually happens in most of the parties. Yisrael Beitenu, we
Right.
mentioned him, Avigdor Lieberman, he handpicks his Knesset list, and
Right.
most of the parties do the same.
Right.
And so when
Shas,
one of the most famous examples of that was when Ariel Sharon actually left the Likud party, created a new party, Kadima.
Why did he leave? Because he lost the vote
Right.
within the Likud among the party members
Right.
who voted against him with the
Disengaged.
disengagement.
Whatever you call
So
it.
just, we can agree on a
And
term,
when Sharon,
the expulsion.
and when Sharon ran for re-election with the Kadima party, he basically handpicked 40 members of the parliament,
Right.
which was a third of the parliament with him. So I mean that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, you had a lot of opportunists who left the Likud party to join him, knowing that they...
As well as the Labour Party.
Right.
Um,
No, Shimon Peres joined, and this was the first
Really?
and so, yeah, this was the first
and what that means
blue and
also,
white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
when you have some of the other legacy parties, like let's take for example the religious parties, United Torah Judaism or the Shas parties.
The rabbi chooses those. yeah.
Right. So the lists are picked by rabbinical councils, and let's say that you like the ideology of the party, but the third member on the specific list, you don't like him, you think he's corrupt, he's not a good representative.
And it's going to be a him, by the way.
Him,
Yeah, with them.
could be a her, and then other
It's
parties.
going to be a him.
But there's no way to take that person out of that slot because you do not pick your parliamentarians. Okay, now that we kind of unraveled that, so
Clarifying that.
people are going to vote for parties. You go into the election booth. Anybody want to describe what happens when you go to the booth?
Well, I can pretend,
What
right?
happens when you go to the booth?
We can all give our personal
Well, you give it
experiences
your
from today.
ID and you get your envelope and you go behind the booth and you're presented with about, if I'm not mistaken, there are 30 options,
29
about
this
29
time,
options.
Yeah.
I don't know, I
Um,
just looked at the
Little
one I was
pieces
You
of
looking
look,
for.
paper.
you look for the one you're looking for, and you hope you take only one piece of paper, slip it into the envelope.
Each party has call letters, by the
has
way.
a code, right?
Right.
It's,
Each party has a
Well,
code.
I've already
Right.
taught my son well. I took my 6-year-old with me the third time in a year, and he knows the letters
Knows.
already. He was in first grade, so this time he knows the letters. Yeah,
Knows
so
the
he
letters.
chose it for me, and you teach him to make sure it's not torn in any way, so
Right.
it's not
It's
disqualified.
like this big, your
Yes.
little petek, it's
Yeah,
called.
I
a
took
little
a picture
piece
of him
paper.
there.
You put it inside a blue envelope, you seal it shut, you walk over, you put it inside a cardboard box, they mark off that you voted,
And that's it.
and you go out. And so what happens is that the final polls were taken on Friday before the elections, and we have no idea what's going on. There's no such thing
No polling
also
yet.
in Israel as the releasing of any exit polls until the polls close. And so we're actually going to take you now until 10 p.m. when the polls officially close, which is an hour and 20 minutes from now. And then we are going to get the first results from the 3 major stations that take polls, channels 11, 12, and 13, each do their own exit polls.
And they're never right.
That's the first time I participated in an exit poll.
Oh, you
I
did?
never had the chance, but the guy was sitting right outside our booth, so
Did you
that was
lie?
interesting. No, I didn't lie.
Shimon Peres used to say the pollsters were off because people told the truth to the pollsters and lied inside the polling booth. That was his, like,
Shimon
No doubt.
Peres
That was
also
one of my
said
favorite lines of his.
he also said regarding the polls that the polls might smell nice like perfume, but don't drink them, right? And so as we've already gotten some early indications, the results may be different than what the polls had shown
Almost certainly
before.
will.
And behind me, you could see what the final polls were on Friday. That's an average of the polls that's
So
taken
this is
by
for sure
by
wrong.
Jeremy Sultan, right?
Will change.
KnessetJeremy.com. He
Right.
tracks
He's
all the
great.
polls over the entire election season. He's been very busy this past year. Hope he's getting paid extra for that.
I hope so.
I think it's a hobby,
Something.
but
It was a
but
hobby, yeah.
he does a great job with that. So
So I just have to say that for me, voting is always a religious experience. And this time, because
Is
there
there
was
a
no
prayer?
one waiting behind,
Is there a
There's
prayer?
So this time, because there was no one behind me in line, because I don't want to be obnoxious, I actually said the prayer for
Really?
the welfare of the state of Israel while I was
That's
in the
nice.
voting booth, because this country is an absolute miracle. And yes, it's based on a lot of sweat, blood, sweat, and tears of human beings, but there's no question in my mind, and I would say in the vast majority of Israelis' minds, doesn't matter how they put themselves in the religious spectrum, that there's a bigger thing happening here, there's a bigger force at work.
Of course,
for
if
us
you
to
know
be here.
how disorganized this
So,
country is and it
exactly,
survives, then you
it's
know there's
fabulous.
something.
So I just went in there and I figured, and I cried, because I always cry, because it is such a privilege as a Jew, as you open the show saying, to be able to in some way affect our
Do
future.
you think that we as
it's huge.
former immigrants that we're more...
Maybe, but I can tell you that I'm also wearing earrings that I bought in Portugal in September. And the reason that I'm wearing these earrings is because I bought them in a village that had once had a very large Jewish population
Really?
until the Inquisition killed them, because the Inquisition went on for hundreds of years. And there was a store right near the stake, in front of the church. It's still there, where Jews were burnt at the stake. And one of the things that they told us actually is that 2/3 of the people burnt at the stake by the Catholics were women, because the women, the mothers, are the ones who give down the faith. And standing there as mother of 7 with a whole lot of grandchildren also, thank God, but also liking earrings. So I thought this was connecting me to them. Like when I'm standing in that polling booth, it's not just about me, it's about all these hundreds of years of people who were absolutely defenseless against whatever forces came up against us, be they religious or whatever it was, and we are standing there, and they are in our minds, and we're doing this for the Jewish people through time and space. And so for me, and it's not getting old, even though it's the 3rd time in 1 year, it is still a tremendous experience.
No, it's
and
definitely,
really,
it's a privilege.
it's a privilege, and it deserves a blessing.
And we try to convey it to my children. Now, the older ones don't want to hang out with us, but when they were younger, you bring them and you let them,
bring them.
and I do give them that. I give them that aspect of it, that for hundreds of
They couldn't
years,
do it,
we couldn't
yes.
do it.
That's
And
correct.
they should
Don't
know.
take it for
Right.
granted.
Don't take it for granted. And
Yeah.
it's nice, I vote on Kibbutz Galuyot Street, the gathering
The
of the
gathering of the
of the
exiles.
exiles, so I vote there. So it's very symbolic that
Yeah.
people have to realize-
It's not just
right?
a country, it's not just an election, it's much, much more than that. When we get down to the nitty-gritty and the dirty stuff and whatever, but I don't think any of us feel a sense of entitlement
each
to
piece-
anything we're doing.
Each piece of
True.
paper is a part of our will, our
It's,
collective will
it
is,
is.
and the fact that we have a democracy here, I think it's something that shouldn't be,
Also.
shouldn't be
Taken for granted,
taken for
absolutely
granted.
not.
Especially given the neighborhood we live in.
Sure.
So people are gonna put their pieces in the boxes. We're gonna get the first exit polls. There's guys sitting outside some of the poll booths with little iPads and they're collecting votes to get a sense of what's going to happen. At 10 o'clock, that's only when this amazing counting procedure takes place. We're gonna have, you have an eligible of over almost 7 million voters that are eligible to vote. I think.
About
Really?
8
That many?
Eligible voters?
6 plus.
Yeah, over
Yeah.
6
I don't know
million
if there's
voters.
9.5 million people. There's that
The last
many
time
over
about
18?
3.5 million voted,
Yeah.
so I guess, and it was about
And since we
60%.
don't let dead people vote in Israel, because we're not Chicago, so that's pretty much the numbers.
In any case,
And also, there's no absentee ballot. That's
Right,
why
no
I flew
absentee
back
ballots.
today. If you're not physically in the
Right,
country,
you
unless
have
you're
to
in
be.
the military or the foreign service,
Right.
you cannot vote.
so what will happen is when the counting begins, within a few hours, we'll get a pretty good sense of what happened. within several hours.
What you'll get in the first few hours is small towns and kibbutzim, and you won't know. The first real indications, I don't think, will be before 2 o'clock in the morning, unless it's a landslide and unless.
Because there's people physically counting
right.
those pieces of paper.
And they have to get, because people,
You have to
I
get the
did this,
boxes.
I
I've
did
done
this.
it too.
When I was 17 years old, and back in 1977 was the first time I attended, and I was a representative for the party I supported in the ballot booth, and you sit there and you take everyone, and you have representatives of each party sitting there, and they open up the envelope, this is for this party, and they put them down there, and everybody's writing it down, because you have to then, to your own party, you have to deliver this was what happened in our booth. And then they gather it from the booth, they go to the local center, they gather it all there, and then it's all taken from all over the country by car, by trucks, by whatever, and it's driven to the Knesset, where they go through, they see the official report, and then they check it. They check to see that these
It
are
really
accurate.
is about as low-tech as it gets. I mean,
But
except for
it
Trump's
works.
on an abacus, it
Right.
probably couldn't get lower tech.
And we saw what happened with the recent Democratic caucuses in Iowa, where the app completely
Right,
malfunctions,
yeah.
right?
Strangely enough.
So in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form,
Surprise,
the
surprise,
paper
surprise.
ballots seem to
Maybe.
not malfunction,
The
even
little
though
boxes do disappear.
Yeah, there have been
Vans on
cases,
the
and
way. And there's always been questions like in the Arab sector, if there was.
Well, that's what happened-
hurricanes
by the
going
way,
on, When 105% of the people.
the last
vote.
elections, the right wing, last year, not the last elections, but April of last year, was later discovered, when they had already decided to go to a second round. It was discovered that there were ballots that were disqualified in the Arab sector, and that had they not been disqualified in this case, and there would have been an extra seat to the right wing, to Bennett's party. They would have crossed the threshold, given 2 more seats to the right wing in that case, and that would have been it. But the head of the elections committee, which was Shofet Elyon, a member of the Supreme Court in Israel. But interesting enough, he used to be a member and ran for office in the Labor Party. He completely didn't even disqualify it. He said, we're going to the next election. We're going to disregard this completely. And that raises a lot of suspicions. If the left wing, if this had happened for the left wing, we would have never gone to that second round. They would have canceled it at that point with the backing of the media. The media kept silent. That's why I keep saying that the media are partly responsible for the circumstances here. This could have been over a year ago.
One of the big issues in the last recent election cycles is whether there would be cameras.
Right.
At all
Because
the
of that
polling
incident.
stations and also at the counting that takes place after.
And the same judge disregarded that. He said no.
I don't know if you recall, but in the 2000 elections in America, it was George W. Bush and Al Gore.
Right.
The elections were over, the numbers came in, but there was a whole issue in Florida of what was called hanging chads, because back then they were doing the voting, I think they were punching a hole in a card, and that caused absolute chaos for, I think, a good couple of weeks, if not a few months.
It took
It took a while to really figure that out, so hopefully there's no chaos in our elections here. And
Hopefully we will have real results within a day,
Yes.
maybe 2 days' time, and it can even switch as there's some votes are counted later, like soldiers' votes are counted after the fact, to make sure that there's no double counting. There's a specific procedure that takes place to make sure that soldiers who voted at their army polling stations didn't also vote in their home polling station. So that takes place. It's going to take, let's say, 2 days to figure out what's
If it's
more or
close.
less 98% of the real count.
Well, it takes 2 weeks until the official results come out. It's like 2 weeks after the elections, and only then. Right, but listen, if it's close, it could make a difference.
Right.
So
Exactly. In September and April, that 1 seat, that 2 seats makes a big difference. And the feeling now is also that
it may come
every
down.
vote really counts. Now, okay.
And only then can they start with the
Right.
whole negotiation
Negotiation,
process.
Exactly, and this is where I want to go. So let's say now, it's 2 days later, we've got results, we know more or less.
We're happy.
I don't know if we're happy, but we know how many seats each party in the Knesset gets. And again, there's 120 seats and there's only 100% of the vote. So that vote has to be divided, that 100% has to be divided into 120.
right.
And that is how you determine how many seats each party gets. There's also some things called vote sharing agreements.
Were there
things
any
that make
agreements
it-
this time?
And thresholds.
I don't know, who signed agreement?
I
By the
haven't
way,
seen
this
it.
means that if you get, because nobody's going to get the exact number of seats. You know,
Right.
you're not going to get 10% or 15%, you're going to get 15 and a half.
There's
So
rounding,
parties have
exactly.
made arrangements between them that they share, meaning
Surplus votes.
the surplus votes. That if they got more than the other, if they had agreement, it shifts.
To one party.
Who
I didn't
who
notice
signed
any,
it this time?
I
didn't
haven't
notice
seen any
I haven't
either.
seen
I haven't
either.
seen either.
Interesting.
No.
Nobody wanted to give anybody their.
Or the media is now reporting on it, but
Right.
Interesting.
And there's also thresholds. I mean, like there's,
Right.
net, Otzma, whatever.
Okay,
they call
so
themselves,
this is very
they go
important.
out.
There's a 3.25% election threshold to prevent very small parties from entering the Knesset.
You know who led that? by the way?
Lieberman.
Lieberman led it. You know why he did that?
To lower the influence of the Arab vote.
No, it had nothing to do with the Arab vote. It had everything to do with his control over his base, which are the former Soviet Union countries, immigrants to Israel. He knew that if he was able to raise it to that point, there's less of a chance that there'll be more Russian-oriented small parties. And this way, he could have that base, like Sharansky had a Pensive party, and so he wanted to make sure that the others, he was always the bigger among them, that no one else would take, because you lose money if you're going to run and don't get in. So nobody would challenge him in the Russian sector, and that meant that he had this base of at least 4 seats that were going to vote for
The
him.
3.25% election threshold is equivalent to about 4 seats. That means if you have, and that also equals about 180,000 votes, give or take, you know how it can be 200,000, depends.
Depends
But,
how many
right.
votes are.
Right.
But it's approximately 4 seats. That means if you if you're a party that gets 100,000 votes, which is a significant amount of votes,
Right.
it might be good for 2 seats, but you will not enter the Knesset. And what happens at that point is that every vote that went to a party that does not cross the threshold is simply discarded, as if that vote didn't take place at all. And then
Wasted, if you
the votes are
By the way, in 1977, you had a one-man party in Israel, Shmuel Plateau Sharon, who was an immigrant from, he escaped for tax, he was being sought after by the French authorities for tax evasion. And he ran for Knesset to get the immunity here. And surprisingly enough, he did succeed, and he ran as a single party, a single member, and he got 3 seats. And so what they ended up doing was they canceled because there was nobody else on his list except for himself. So he got into the Knesset and actually supported Begin's coalition, and they lost 2 seats, which were,
That was the big year, 77.
yes, that was a big year.
So once we know which parties got into the Knesset and we know how many seats each party received, then a process begins. And the chairman or the leadership of each party then meets with the president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, who basically has the ceremonial position in general, except during the time of the elections, where he collects the recommendations from each party for who that party wants to be the prime minister of the state of Israel.
And by the way, it doesn't have to be the person who leads the party.
Correct.
They can come and recommend,
Anyone.
and he has
Not the
no,
largest party either.
and it doesn't have to be the largest party, but whoever has the most, the person who, when all the parties' representatives come to the president, and he has no leeway in this, and he has no say in it, he has to tally the number of each party, and they said 5 seats and 10 seats. If the 15 people from 2 parties say, we want this person, and that ends up being the most, he has to assign the responsibility for forming the next government on that person. Because there's been a challenge to that. They've
I
been
thought
saying
it was up to him to decide who
No.
he thinks can
He-
form the
he
coalition.
thinks, but it has to be
He has their
based.
opinion.
It has to be on the people,
The
a number of people on the
Mhm.
recommendations that he
He
received.
can't go against those
He
recommendations.
can't go against those recommendations
But
because
what's
he doesn't have that authority. They
Mhm.
represent the people's votes,
Mm.
so he has to bow down to the will of the people in that case. Because there have been the media and the courts here have been, and there have been a lot of people saying to him, "Oh no, you don't have to do that." No, the law is very clear. He has no say in this at all. He can only make the decision on the number, and there may be a tie, who knows, but it comes down to him simply saying who has the best chance, and most members of Knesset recommended that name has to be the one that he assigns.
And then
Yeah, looks like the third biggest party though is gonna be the Arab party, unless the polls are completely wrong, which
Yeah.
also adds a lot of interest.
So we'll talk about that soon. I just want to get through the mechanics also. So what happens is the president will then give the mandate to the person who he believes, based on the recommendations, has the best chance of forming a parliamentary majority, which means a coalition of parties that equals at least 61 members, simple parliamentary majority. At that time, that candidate then has 21 days to negotiate with the members of all the parties to form a coalition. And that can come from people that recommended him, from people that did not recommend him, and to see if he can put together a government. At the end of 21 days, he may request an additional 14-day extension from the president. The president can decide whether or not to grant it. I think that it's my understanding that if there are in serious negotiations, then an extension can be granted. In September, no extension was granted after the 21 days because it was clear that 14 days wouldn't have helped the negotiations. If that prime ministerial candidate does not form a government within the allotted period, the president can then turn around and hand the mandate to form a government to someone else that he feels will have the best opportunity. And that actually did happen in the last elections. First, Netanyahu, who had 55 recommendations, received the first chance. He didn't get any more than those initial 55. So then the president turned to Benny Gantz, who had only about 50 recommendations.
2009, that also happened.
Right, and then the second person will have 14 days to try to form a coalition. There's no extension after that period. If after 2 separate candidates try to form a government, and we're already talking now a month and a half later,
Here we go.
then
Which we've seen.
a 21-day period opens up where any member of Knesset can bring a petition to the president with 61 signatures, and then the president will turn and give the mandate to them to try to form a government. Then they have 14 days to try to form a government if somebody comes forward with that petition. And if at the end of that cycle, or if no third member is able to come up with a coalition, the Knesset is disbanded and you go to elections again. And usually,
within 90 days.
if we were doing an elections coverage, all of these rules and regulations would be totally irrelevant, except that the last 2 times they were
That actually happened.
relevant.
Really
This has
did
happened.
happen.
So, and in fact, the 4th elections already have a scheduled date
Really?
in September.
Deborah.
And by the way, just so people know that in the meantime, the former government in Israel continues to rule
Right.
as an interim government. And if this does get extended, Netanyahu will be interim prime minister longer than Ehud Barak was prime minister for real.
Right.
More days.
Which is important to note that the challengers have wanted to replace Netanyahu, but by continuing a stalemate, they've basically continued
Extended
with
his
Netanyahu at the
premiership.
helm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's
And they've done wonderful things in the past year for anybody who supports the Likud and the right wing.
Yeah,
They've done,
the defense
in this
minister
case,
done some great
they're saying, who
things.
cares, we'll go to another election, we'll still be in power, so.
Well, my hope is because next week is Purim, and of course in Jerusalem there's that second day of Purim, and a lot of people
well.
do
You
a lot
want
of
to
drinking.
describe?
So maybe we should have the negotiations on Purim, just give everybody a lot to drink, and while they're in their inebriated state, they can pull
You want
together
to
a
explain
government.
what
Moments of
Purim is
sanity.
for those that don't
Purim
know?
is a great holiday. Purim is the holiday where we read the book of Esther, and it talks about the miracle of the Jews who were essentially sentenced to death under the Persian period in a place called Shushan, and
In Persia.
in Persia, exactly. And with the king of Achashverosh, and it starts off with a whole party that he's throwing, and of course his number 2, Haman, boom, 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 who's the guy who decides apparently from Amalek, who decides to destroy the Jews. And so it's become like the paradigm of a situation where the Jews are out in the diaspora. It's the first time, by the way, it's very interesting.
Right.
It's the first time that we're called Yehudim.
Really?
Because Yehudi used to just refer Judeans to the people from the tribe of Judah, like where King David comes from. And you have a situation, and it talks about in the book of Esther, Ish Yehudi Ayab Shoshana Bira, Shmo Mordechai Ben Meir Ben Kish Ish Yemini. He's actually from the tribe of Benjamin. Yet we're all called Yehudim, and it's very interesting that out in the diasporas, the first time that we're all just called Jews, and I think it's a big message for us that with all our little internal whatevers, little tribal differences, if you will, when the world looks at us, we're Jews. You know, and when the Nazis put people in the oven, they didn't care if you were Ger Chassid or if you ate pork on Yom Kippur. Like
Right.
that was it, you were a Jew. It's a message I think that we need to internalize. But it's a holiday of masks and of things not being the way that they're seen. God is not mentioned at all in the book of Esther, but you see his hand behind the scenes. And it's a holiday where you're mandated to drink until you can't tell the difference between Mordechai, who's the Jew, the Benjamin, who finally saves the whole situation with Queen Esther in the palace doing her thing.
That's
And-
Madonna's
and,
Jewish name,
yes,
Esther.
And anyhow, it's a great story, but you're supposed to, among things like hearing the Megillah and giving gifts to poor people and having a big meal, because what we do is celebrate by eating, like everybody does, but you're supposed to drink until you can't tell the difference between Mordechai and Haman. And
Between
now-
BB and Gaines.
whatever. So, but maybe this is the answer for the coalition.
And depending on who you ask in the
Just-
country, one will think that one is
Exactly.
Mordecai, and the other
Coalition.
thinks that the other is Seaman. It's that's really,
Wouldn't that be great?
yeah. But
Yeah.
that really is how it is in Israel today. Is
Let's
that
try it.
you definitely do have political divisions,
We can all
and
come in costume.
and
Gantz can dress up like BB and BB like Gantz.
well, what was really
Actually,
funny.
there was this video that Bibi
That was the
did.
video.
There was a video.
Well,
Bibi did
that's
exactly
Purim.
that.
There's
That's
also a picture going around on social media about what will be the 53rd elections, where there's pictures of
Yeah.
Netanyahu and Gantz both in their late 80s. They look like
Yeah.
Ariel Sharon and
In
Shimon
2053.
Peres. Yeah, 2053
That was
elections.
a good one.
We got a great sense of humor in this country. There's nothing like the
Nothing like it,
elections
yeah.
to pull out some of the greatest humor. Totally.
The question is if it'll be a day of clarity. Purim.
If Purim will be
it'll
a day of
really
clarity.
be Benahafochu.
Benahafochu,
It'll
yeah.
really be different than
That would be
everything's
nice.
supposed to be. Okay.
And by the way, the elections were pushed up a week because of that.
Because
they were
of-
supposed to be
I
officially
think it would
next
have been
Tuesday,
great to
right?
have them on Purim. I
And
mean, I've had tourists who've come to me, Like, they've landed on Purim, and then I've seen them a day or two later, and they're like, what was going on in this country? I was coming in from the airport, and a bumblebee came by the taxi.
It's our Cinco de Mayo. It's our whatever other festival.
It's wild. Everyone, let's go.
So I'm seeing a headline right now, and again, these headlines are before
Right,
the
we
exit
got it.
polls, and it's before anything. So it says, right-wingers claim Likud set to win 37 seats as voting enters final stretch.
I was sure be 40. That was my bit.
You're disappointed?
And we have about 1 hour now before the first exit polls.
Right.
So we've kind of been in campaign mode for over a year, right? And yet there's a feeling, I feel at least, and maybe you do as well, that this campaign, the third campaign, was a little bit different than the first two. I want to speak a little bit about Likud and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So the first two campaigns, Netanyahu, who's been the prime minister, was the prime minister for 10 years running, basically was able to sit back and say, look, my accomplishments speak for themselves. You know what I represent. You know what they're accusing me of. Go out and vote. And that was more or less, I'm generalizing, but for a point, that is what the Likud campaign was. It was a very inactive campaign, the first campaign. The second one, similarly inactive. This third campaign has been completely different. And Netanyahu has been out in the field constantly for the last several months. He's been doing as many as 3-4 events a day. He's been speaking in front of large rooms, totally extemporaneously, just being shuttled from one place to the other. He's making videos on social media every day, and that's not when he's traveling to see world leaders. In this campaign, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but he ran to the United States all of a sudden to jumpstart the rollout of the United States long-awaited Peace to Prosperity vision. We'll talk about that plan in a few minutes. But Netanyahu thought that he needed something big in order to get the Israeli public to realize that they needed him at the helm for this upcoming period. So he rolled the dice and ran to Washington. Also put Benny Gantz on the spot by saying that, by similarly inviting him, recommending that the President of the United States invite him to Washington as well. And Benny Gantz ran to Washington too to give his tepid approval of the rollout of the plan. Immediately after Netanyahu finishes with the President of the United States in Washington, gets on a plane, goes to Moscow, brings back Nama Issachar, who was imprisoned already for 7 months at that time in a prison in Moscow for flying from India back to Israel with a transit stop in Moscow. Didn't even leave the airport, but she was found with 9 grams of cannabis in her luggage. Was thrown in jail for many months without any contact with her family. Then was tried and sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, which seemed to many to be a bit of a stretch for the offense, especially considering that Nama didn't even have access to her luggage while in Moscow. It was really a stopover, thrown in jail. But Netanyahu runs to Moscow to bring Nama Issachar home. The second Netanyahu is back in Israel, he runs off to Uganda, where he gets the leader of Uganda to acknowledge that he's considering moving the embassy or opening up an embassy in Jerusalem, and then also opens up diplomatic relations with Sudan, which is a Muslim majority nation that had long been hostile to the state of Israel, and also enabled Israeli airplanes finally to fly over Sudanese airspace, which cuts off the times of flight.
Well, it's not the first time Israeli planes have flown over Sudan. We did that to attack caravans of Iranian caravans who were bringing missiles into Gaza. Well, at least according to foreign sources. Exactly.
Netanyahu comes back. Then he announces that his government will build not far from here in the sort of disputed Jerusalem areas of Givat HaMatos, which is close to the southern border of Jerusalem, and then also in the highly contentious E1 land that swatch land between Jerusalem and the large settlement community of Ma'ale Adumim. So he announced building, and he had wanted to announce that there would be the application of sovereignty. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Netanyahu has been a tour de force in the last several months, and he's also focused very heavily on data. In this election, there was a data breach actually, which is something which we can talk about as well. But
I'd be interested to hear as well, because I didn't understand what was going on with that.
well, basically, what Likud did was they got the database of Israeli voters, which is everybody, basically, including phone numbers and everything. You know, in Israel, you get text messages from all the parties and calls and everything. Right. So it's very clear that the parties have access to the voter databases, including personal information. And what they did was the Likud was looking at places that they felt were historically right-wing supporting areas. And if you look at the map of voting in Israel, it's very interesting, because you'll see that towns, basically like regions, usually go to parties, right? So this town will go to, like North Tel Aviv goes to the left, and the settlements go to the Yamina Jewish Home, and Jerusalem usually goes to the Likud, and different area, Bnei Brak will go to United Torah Judaism, right? So so they were looking at areas where there's traditional right-wing support, but very low voter turnout. And they were really targeting those areas very heavily, because what they wanted to do was to say, hey, we're going to have a hard time moving people that oppose us, right, on the political spectrum. The last two elections, it's either the sort of the pro-Bibi side or the anti-Bibi side. So they said, we can't convince the people on the anti-Bibi side to come back to us. So where are we going to create votes? So they said, well, who should be voting for us that isn't? And as we saw before, the voter turnout in September was 69%. That means 30% of the voting public is not coming out. So they were specifically targeting that public, and that's why the Likud was very optimistic, because they think that they have found the votes that they need. Now,
I'm following on WhatsApp on an internal journalist website, and the major stations seem too giddy about what's coming out of their polls, and so they're starting to create the drama. And they're saying here that they're saying that these exit polls are going to be very dramatic. They're absolute game changers. Mm-hmm. Nothing compared to anything we've seen before. Which here, if you
so a bigger contrast.
If you're on the right, that's not good news, because
I don't know. Who knows?
Who knows?
Let's talk a little bit.
People may have lied to them.
Let's talk a little bit about also the Blue and White Party. Okay, you know, who are they? Where did they come from? Right, the Blue and White Party was never a party before the recent first elections a year ago. Right, it was a combination of the Yair Lapid's party, the Yesh Atid party, and then three brand new parties: the Israel Resilience Party, which was created by Benny Gantz, the Telem Party, which was created by former defense minister and Likud defector Moshe Yalon, who formed his own party after you know, he was previously Netanyahu's defense minister, and Netanyahu wanted to push him over to the foreign ministry in order to make room at the time for Avigdor Lieberman to become the defense minister, which was his demand for entering that last government. Right. Yalon turned him down, said forget it, resigned, said Netanyahu was corrupt, didn't want to serve under him anymore, went out, formed his own party. So basically these three parties came together to form a super party which could challenge Netanyahu.
They're not a party, they're a list. They're officially described as a list, not as a party, because they're all separate entities. And they agreed among how to divide the seats according to the number that they received.
It's basically a mini coalition.
Right.
With people who hate Bibi.
But that's the only thing that
and there's left, center, and right in that party. I mean, Moshe Yalon is known to be on defense, very far to the right, and you have some other Likud defectors like Yoaz Hendel.
Zvika
Right?
Hauser, right, sure.
Tzvi Hauser, that were
Right.
there,
Which
right?
may end up being very interesting, because if Bibi gets, let's say, 57, 58, you know, he may be able to pull, that's what some
Right,
people are
that's the
saying, to get some of these people to defect, if you will, blue and white, and move over to him and get his
Look,
3 or 4 that way.
Blue and white, when they sat together, it was supposed to be, initially, it was supposed to be two heads, meaning they would share, if they would
Yeah.
rotate among
Rotation.
their own people, which was Yair Lapid
Right.
and Benny Gantz. Yair Lapid having experience, not having anything behind him except for the fact that he was a politician, he was a journalist before that, but he was a politician as a minister. But
He
if
had,
you,
he had won 19 seats in government. He
but if
was
you
a
compare
finance
that
minister.
to Benny Gantz, who was still chief of staff, well, but Benny Gantz comes with no political experience and was basically a blank card. Nobody knows exactly who he was and what he was. He also reached the chief of staff by, you would say, by fluke,
Right.
because he was the odd man out. When there was a lot of politics going on with a member of his party, which was a former chief of staff, Ashkenazi, who actually tried to perform a coup d'etat against the reigning Minister of Defense, Ehud Barak, who, by the way, supports Gantz and Ashkenazi, though despises both of them, because they didn't want Netanyahu's candidate for chief of staff to follow Ashkenazi in the seat there. So he...
This is like a Gemara class.
no, this is amazing what was going on there. This is total corruption of this person, but it's clean, and because the media aren't pushing that point, so a lot of people aren't aware of what was going on there. And also, Gantz, Ashkenazi, and others are all covered by what do you call it in English? They were investigated. They were investigated by the Attorney General and by the Israel police, but they had a
gag order.
a gag order. That's the word I
We're
was
talking
looking for.
about the Harpaz affair.
And the Harpaz affair and other affairs that Gantz has been involved with, and they're hiding behind this. And they're not releasing materials and they don't even say why. It's not because it may endanger the security of the state, they're just covering it up. So that's but a lot of people on the right wing were very concerned about and raised questions, but this was, again, not picked up by the media.
Or they covered it up.
Or they cover it up because,
They
believe
don't
me,
know.
they know what's going on
Something
there.
is
A
gonna
lot of the
change,
stuff
yeah.
has been leaked, a lot of things have been released, but because of the gag order, it's illegal to bring this up, because you can't even release it on social media, because the Attorney General's office made it very clear that anybody releasing
that
this,
violates
and there were a
the-
few
yeah.
right-wing journalists who wanted to expose it, but they were threatened that they will be taken with the full arm of the law will come down on them if they do. So you're having, in many ways, a lot of mafia tactics being applied here in our political system. This from a party that last year said they're going to show, this is the new politics in Israel. Well, a clean politics. So last year it may have worked, and over the next few months, they turned out not to be as clean
Right.
and as they were
But they're
presenting
tall.
themselves.
They're all very tall.
They're all very tall
I
and
think
blue
that
eyes.
makes-
And
yeah,
blue
I think
eyes.
that makes
Yair
an
Lapid
impression
is not,
on people.
right.
Well, I mean,
Yair Lapid's not tall, no.
I think that one of the things that,
Not in comparison to the rest of them.
Okay.
Short he
Hey,
isn't, yeah.
I mean,
He is.
the fact that,
Shorter than I am.
Really,
Yeah.
want to stand up and show
You know, I'm not big.
the fact that Benny Gantz both had security credentials, which he
Right.
certainly has as a chief of staff, and he has a party backed with 2 other chiefs of staff behind him, and the fact that he actually didn't have political experience, and like as Eve, as you note, he stands tall. He's got a really good tailor. Like he looks like somebody that is
Yeah,
a very
piercing
respectable
blue eye.
individual. You know, that was an advantage. But as Danny, as you note, that as one election became 2, became 3, we start to know Benny Gantz a little bit more than we did in that small.
He wasn't really
window.
visible.
Started
He wasn't really
fraying.
very visible. during the,
He wasn't visible, but I'm a former paratrooper, and he was a paratrooper and very known. And we have today, because of social media, people are much more in contact. Not rumors, but a lot of information was going around about things and his background, and there was a lot of rumors from people who know going around, and again, not picked up and not released out. People didn't want to get personal. And a lot of these things are very personal issues. I'm not even talking about suspicion of corruption or failures in his private enterprises as he became a civilian. So I'm not even talking about those kind of things. But as it got dirtier, a lot of this stuff started being released. Now, the left wing, when you had a former general and an amazing general who was leading the right wing, Ariel Sharon, we always had these accusations of fascism, and there's going to be a military coup, and if Ariel Sharon gets elected, there's going to be the end of democracy. The same thing they said about Begin, the same thing they said about Shamir, the same thing they say about Bibi today. They're always concerned about our democracy. But having a military commander heading the Likud, oh, this was horrible. We're all fascists.
Yeah.
Suddenly they have 3 commanders on the left wing, but it's okay. Now, the liberals, who you would expect not to support this, they all started falling up in groves. For this
one of the
party.
things they're saying about Gantz, actually, and that did get out, is that he was more willing to risk the lives of Israeli soldiers over the lives of
He said this.
terrorists
He
in
said this
Gaza.
officially.
Yeah, that was out, and that was
during that
clear.
operation,
Correct.
he sacrificed Israeli Golani soldiers
Yes.
so not to harm civilians in the Gaza Strip.
Right, correct. Now that I think to many people resonated on the wrong side, in the sense that this is not a leader. This is not someone we want leading this country.
Right.
I saw after the first election, I was willing to forgive him after the first election, kind of a fresh guy to politics, perhaps. Didn't really know how to run a campaign. But the second time I saw, he wasn't really a very visible campaigner. Wasn't a very visible politician. And I thought that kind of reflected on his ability to lead, on his ability to be vocal, on the ability to push back. Where the Israeli leader always must be able to push back against the Western world, against other governments.
Right.
And I think Netanyahu is an expert at doing that. I've seen it myself with my own eyes. He pushes back very well against Western leaders who have asked him to do outrageous things that are certainly not to the benefit of Israelis and the State of Israel. And I did not see that level of leadership in Gantz. that
So
I see with
yesterday,
Netanyahu.
when I was at AIPAC and I was at the opening session, and of course, because the Israeli elections, this is very interesting, were scheduled after AIPAC. All right, AIPAC is going on right now, Sunday,
Right.
Monday, Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I think it's very telling that it wasn't a reason to not have the elections, the fact that AIPAC was going on. And I think it says something about how they organize.
Because in general, you mean that Israelis
You have a
go.
lot of Israelis there, you have a lot of
Right.
Israelis speaking. And so you really didn't have Israelis there, very few Israelis, or those like myself who were there at the beginning and then left early who wanted to come vote, or an Israeli that I know who told me that she votes right, her husband votes left, so she told him, I'm out of the country, you better be out of the country too, and we'll cancel each other out.
Yes.
So all kinds of things that were going. But they had him on video, as well as Bibi Netanyahu in the morning session, because they weren't physically there. And I was really shocked at how unimpressive he was, Gantz. I mean, you have to play with the big boys if you're
Right,
going to
right.
be the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Your English has to be top-notch, which is not at all.
And if
Historically,
not,
That's
speak
the
Hebrew.
lingua franca.
And if not, speak Hebrew.
Historically, Israeli
that-
leaders never necessarily had top-notch
Right.
English, but
Right.
Yeah,
No,
that's
Shimon
what
Peres
they
is
said, the
different.
foreign minister couldn't speak English.
Paris certainly wasn't. He had this very heavy
accent.
Polish
But it is a
accent.
huge
No, but he had good
advantage.
command.
He had
Good
good
Right, he did have
command.
command. That's certainly.
I didn't like what he said, but he had good command of language. But he was just very unimpressive.
Right.
As
Unimpressive
somebody
is
that
certainly
I
true.
want out there, let's say he wins, I want him out there defending my interests as an Israeli. And we've got some really bad people out there, we've got Iran, and we've got Russia, and we've got Erdogan, and who knows what's going to be in the United States in a few months' time, which I think also, Alex, is the difference between this election and the last two, is that now you have the American elections looming
Yeah.
closer,
Yeah.
and we are definitely getting affected
Looking scary.
by what's happening, especially with the Democrats, where some
Yeah.
of the leading people in the Democratic Party, like Sanders, are, you could say it, anti-Israel.
Yeah.
It's a very frightening thing happening, and I think that's affecting Israelis more now also in March than it did in September or, last April or September, because that's looming. Who knows who our new prime minister is going to be
Will he be
dealing
able to
with in the
handle
White
Yeah.
House?
We
And
need a Netanyahu
will he be
during
able to
Obama.
handle it?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine a Sanders-Gantz duo.
No doubt. Well, that's what I was
That's-
worried
that's
about.
possibility.
That's what I was worried about also in 2009 when we had Obama as leading the administration in America.
Yeah.
I don't see Bougie Herzog or Tzipi Livni having been able to push back against Obama the way Netanyahu did.
Because they don't get the American system. Many Israelis
Perhaps
don't
so. It's
understand
also
how
just
you
a
work.
personality.
Netanyahu knew. And they keep complaining about the fact that Netanyahu is causing a divide. He hasn't caused a divide,
No,
by the way.
absolutely not.
He has made it very clear that American senators and congressmen understand that their states benefit from the relationship with the state of
Correct.
Israel. There are other things going on. It's not only the relationship with the president. That's
Right.
very important.
Right.
But the United States is made up of the Congress and the Senate. And if they understand that it's beneficial to their states,
Sure.
the relationship with Israel, not only because of the Jewish vote. Netanyahu identified the problem with with the Jewish vote that its influence is going to decline in the United States, and he worked on making Israel an American, or a strong Israel, and a good relationship with the state of Israel, an American interest.
Yeah.
So even if you have these congressmen or congresswomen
Right.
and
a bipartisan issue.
and the partisan issue, still they realize that it's not very quick that they can just wipe Israel off, not only for military reasons, but also for economic reasons. And also there's a lot of exchange on the academic level between Israel and the United
How about
States.
intelligence?
And intelligence, certainly, is, you're looking, if we take
Israeli
the economic
intelligence?
aspect, people know in American companies how much they pay on R&D. How much they expend, the expense is for R&D for a successful company.
Right.
Israel is the United States
R&D.
R&D.
Yes.
That's what
There
Israel has
isn't a
become.
major company in the world that doesn't have R&D here.
The average Joe doesn't care about that. The average voter in America doesn't care about Israel being at the forefront of fighting terror and
Right, that's not what they-
standing up for
Or their
security and so
cell
on.
phones, or the new
They don't care.
medication that might cure
Right.
them.
No, they don't care about that. They really don't care about
But
that.
Americans-
America has changed. All America
Yes,
sees
it
now
has.
is human rights. That's all they see today. And they're
Are you
being
talking
presented-
about New York, Los Angeles, or are you talking
Yeah,
about the heartland?
I don't know if all.
Because in the
Americans are
heartland,
like that.
I traveled
Yeah.
4 years ago with my family, and we were in New York, but you move upstate, and
The
then
different
down
America.
in the deep south and the west. We did a
Yeah.
large trip. Any place they heard, oh, what language are you speaking? Hebrew. Oh, where are you from? Israel. Oh, we love
We love
Israel.
Israel. Correct.
Yeah.
Everywhere you
Correct.
got that. People, to the point where we were playing in some archive with the kids, and they won these tickets, and they were going to, oh, you're from Israel? Forget that. What do you want? They open up, take whatever. We love Israel.
You
Israel's
have,
Yeah.
you have that,
It's
but I
amazing.
just saw a debate now between Bret Stephens and Anat Wilf on one side, and you had Peter Boehner, and I forget who the other panelist was.
That's okay.
And they were basically debating the motion of is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, by the end of the debate, the Peter Boehner team had won more support from the audience than Bret Stephens had, and I think that
But who was
sort
the
of
audience?
points
Yeah,
out. I don't know. Correct. That's
Exactly.
If
a
you
That's
go
legitimate
to a
question.
crowd of
No doubt.
Republicans in the heartland of
doubt.
America,
Go to
Correct.
Texas,
It's
you'll
a
get a
legitimate
different
question. Of
answer.
course, I don't know who the audience was, and maybe that
Right.
was clear. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I think that sort of points to a part of a pattern where you see a lot more people concerned and maybe even siding with the left argument or the Palestinian narrative.
It's definitely the case
So
on
that
the
changes,
universities.
And
That's for sure.
Right.
One of the things that comes up in this election and has been pointed out by the Gantz party, by the Blue and White Party, and by Benny Gantz and by Yair Lapid, is that it's Netanyahu's fault that Israel
Yeah.
may no longer be a bipartisan concern in the United States. They've really
Then
harped
he's
in on that.
divisive.
In particular, Yair Lapid had a big interview in the Jerusalem Post just a week ago where he attacked Netanyahu for this and said that Blue and White would repair the
oh,
relationship
you're
with
talking
the
about Yair
Democrats.
Lapid. Isn't he one of those people who signed before the elections in the United States saying that when Trump was here, that they don't want him to be received at the Israeli Knesset? And then these are the same people who are doing that, the same people who go to the States and support these anti-Israeli groups. And, this is,
Yeah.
they're encouraging, because of wanting to get support for their politics here in Israel, they're encouraging that kind of attitude. And they're the first ones to come out and speak against Netanyahu.
Do any of them have connections to J Street or any of the other
Yes,
left-wing
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
organizations now?
Merit's party have appeared at J Street
Anybody in Blue and
conferences.
White?
I don't know
But that's just
officially.
indicative of the thought process there.
Well, one of the things that's come out in the last several weeks is also the advisors behind Blue and White, specifically Benny Gantz's top advisors. And so there is one of the Obama campaign advisors, Joel Benenson, who is one of the top advisors of the Blue and White campaign.
That says a lot.
And
Yeah,
also,
they're interfering in Israeli elections.
well,
That's
this
what
has
they're
been
doing.
a regular
An
pattern. I
ongoing-
mean, even Bill Clinton back in the 90s
admitted.
openly
admitted,
acknowledged
yes.
Yeah.
that he tried to get Netanyahu out of office the first time. So this has been a pattern, and we had V15 a few years
Obama,
ago where
right.
Obama sent his people over here to try to beat Netanyahu in 2015. And you have Joel Benenson. You also have an Israeli communications advisor, Ronen Sur. And what is really interesting is that both Benenson and Sur, if you take a look at their Twitter feeds, dating back 2 years, 3 years, have several tweets where they likened American President Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler.
Wow.
Right. So Ronen Sur had a post that said that Trump's next book would be Mein Trump, right? Playing on and also
terrible.
said first we had Barack Hussein Obama, and now we have Donald Adolf Trump, and I wonder who will be next, right? And what happened was that these tweets actually came out on the very day when Benny Gantz was in Washington, D.C. for his meeting with Donald Trump about the rollout of the Peace to Prosperity vision. And they were passed to the president, and the president told the blue and white camp, if you bring him to the meeting, this meeting's not happening, right? So, and Benenson also had a few tweets along similar lines, where basically very explicit references towards between Trump and Adolf Hitler. So you can see kind of the inexperience of Benny Gantz, where he has to rely on whoever is thrown before him to rely on, to get the experience that he needs, and he's made very poor decisions, basically, on who he's taking.
All right, I hate the journalists here. One of the major journalists, Amit Segal, has just
What's
posted
going
now.
on with that? And
He's like, wow. That's all he's putting out
and
there.
Amit Segal is one of the right-wing journalists that's one of the few. I mean, the Israeli media spectrum is very left-wing in general, and Amit Segal kind of stands out as being the one who gains respect from the left wing, and also because he has access, right? So Amit Segal,
Which is what
he just
happened
posted now on
today,
Facebook.
though.
I could wring his neck right now. That's so irritating. He's getting the inside information
And
from the
just
polls
teasing
on the
us.
channel on channel 2.
But there was
and he's saying wow.
But there was a situation with him today, and Danny may know what happened yesterday.
Yes.
That his sources
were
were
exactly
exposed
despicable.
by a left-wing journalist who works with him, and apparently that is totally against the code of ethics of journalism. Yet it happened.
That for the past year, they have been illegally releasing, having sources release information from the investigations into Netanyahu, into all the cases against Netanyahu, and everybody in the media have been defending this. Now, this is a crime. Releasing inside information from criminal investigations, and the media have been doing this, and they don't say a word. He comes out with something that helps the right-wing cause, and suddenly he's outed, and his source is outed officially on air while he's sitting there, and she's saying the name of the source.
So is that actually a crime, or it's just
That's not a
done?
crime. It's unethical.
It's unethical. Okay.
It's unethical. You
Yeah.
don't do that.
Yeah.
let's pivot a little bit towards the Netanyahu corruption charges, because the first elections were called because these indictments were looming, and the indictments were looming, and the Attorney General says, I'm
Right.
going to indict, I intend to indict, now I indicted, now we're going to trial. And in fact, Netanyahu's trial in 3 separate corruption cases is going to open in just 2 weeks from today, on the 17th of March. So this is very real. But
A lot going on.
Let's be accurate here, because you're talking about corruption. What exactly are the charges?
Let's take a look at the
You can
charges.
say alleged if you like. Yeah.
Well,
Alleged.
right?
Alleged's
but
a good
forget
word.
the alleged. They're not even using alleged. But even if you look at these things, one of them is he's getting positive coverage, positive media coverage.
Right.
Listen, I should
That's
be in
not
jail
corruption.
because
Okay.
my entire career was spent getting positive coverage from the media for the state of Israel, and that meant in return giving them either insights or giving them access or giving the
Well,
foreign
they're
press.
trying to make the point that Netanyahu, as the prime minister, was trying to gain some kind of favor from leading publishers. But that's been done, I think, by every single premier.
Right.
in the history of the
Everybody
Any
does that, so-
politician ever?
Every
Yeah.
politician
So-
ever, anywhere in
I'm
the
sure
world.
Henry VIII also tried to
and
get
they
it.
also discovered that he never got the good coverage.
Oh,
Right.
He
So
never
he
even
failed.
received it.
Right.
But they're saying, no, he tried to do it.
Well, the
But at
accusation is he gave off the impression that it was
Right.
possible to.
And by the way,
Right.
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Let's unwind it a little bit for the
Right,
people
sorry.
that don't know. There's basically 3 separate cases that have been filed already in court that are going to trial. The first is called Case 1000. It's one in which Netanyahu is alleged to have received expensive gifts from wealthy friends, longtime friends of his, that
Cigars
we
and
call
champagne.
cigars,
Right.
champagne, totaling about $200,000 worth of expensive gifts. They didn't report. Okay?
No, they're saying, well, just again, the person who gave these gifts spent $200,000 on giving gifts. He gave those gifts to a whole bunch of Israeli politicians, including Shimon Peres, including Lapid, including others. In Netanyahu's case, they're saying that in return for this, Netanyahu intervened in his favor to get a visa to the United States. Now, first off,
Arnon Milchan. is the
Arnon
Hollywood
Milchan,
producer.
exactly. And Arnon is saying he gave out these, and if you know, listen, I worked for 30 years in government with I know Israeli diplomats from the top level and politicians and members of the military.
He ran the government press office.
They all get gifts. I was like the only idiot who, when I got gifts, I put them in the cupboard. Luckily, I don't drink. I don't care about gifts. I came back from South Africa. I was given a pen. So I call up, I'm a official for government. I've been government many years. I know I have to call the committee that evaluates gift
Pen.
values, and then they tell you if you can have that or not. You can buy it. If it's over $100, you can buy it. So I asked them about this pen. Oh, why are you calling us? Now we have to convene. Now we have to meet. Why don't you just check and see how much it costs? So it was a $400 pen. I told them, take it. I don't want to have a $400 pen. Oh, now we have to do it. We have to sign it in.
Register.
I'm sure that some prime minister, I won't say his name, who liked pens, had the ownership of that pen eventually. But a lot of people take
It's a very gray area.
Yes,
the
it's a very
gift
gray
giving.
area, and a lot of them enjoy it and benefit from it, and there are other ways of doing it. When they go on speaking engagements, everybody benefits. And working with prime ministers over the years, you have a bunch of tuchus lickers who are standing in line just to give them. And it doesn't matter, it's Netanyahu, and it was Rabin, and it was Shamir. Shamir had no patience for any of these people. Shamir was a very strict person. He just kept them away from him. But everybody else, you can't keep away, because they're always there.
Just for
And
the
they're always
record, I
close.
think the gifts are all stored in the basement. in the
Yeah,
Prime
but they're
Minister's
always
office.
there.
They're in the
giving them
Vatican.
things, and they're
The
buying them
Vatican.
things, and they're always there. Mr. Prime Minister, do you need this? Mrs. Prime Minister, do you need that? And we were sitting as government officials, standing around looking at these people. They were so, in my eyes at least, they were embarrassing. Don't you have any self-respect that you're chasing after these leaders and giving, because it gave them a sense of
Well,
importance?
we know that
And
Netanyahu
access.
smokes cigars.
So he
and we
smokes
also know that
cigars.
these are his friends. But this is
Kennedy
considered,
smokes cigars as well.
This is considered to be the weakest of the cases.
Right.
Go to
probably-
case 4000, which
Right.
we haven't
Yeah.
talked
Right,
about.
so you
yet.
have the case 2000, which is
2000.
supposed to be a little bit more, which is where it's called the Israel Hayom law. Basically, there's one newspaper in Israel that is a pro-Netanyahu media outlet that was started by Sheldon Adelson several years back, and the way it became Israel's largest newspaper is because
It's free.
they distribute it for free, right? And it cut big time into the subscription of the former largest newspaper, Yediot Achronot, which is a much more left-wing publication. It's always been
It wasn't with Centra, but it had a stranglehold on all politicians in Israel. He used to sit on the balcony in the Knesset, making sure and writing down notes.
So the
If there were things, because
the
he's first
publisher.
all these papers, just like Reuters and all these media organizations. A serious media organization is basically first and foremost an economic conglomerate, and they have economic interests. And they have a paper which sort of helps them. I always say that Reuters, their media people, are more their intelligence. They're around the world gathering intelligence for their economic interests of the company, of Thomson Reuters. The same thing here with the Yediot Achronot. And he made it very clear to all these Israeli politicians that he's watching. But suddenly when you had Israel Hayom come in, they had an out. They had an alternative.
So the publisher of Yediot Achronot, Arnon Moses, basically started to say, I'll play ball, Bibi. Let's play ball. Okay? And he wanted to advance the law that would make it illegal for Israel Hayom to be a free distribution, which would benefit big time Yediot Achronot.
You're losing a lot of money.
And in return, Netanyahu said, well, what would you give me if I do that? Would you improve the coverage in Yediot Achronot of me and my administration?
But sorry for interrupting, but how do we know that? Why do we know that?
This is an important question, right? There was basically a fishing expedition that took place. You know that basically what happened is that the police, the investigators they wanted to get to Netanyahu. So they said, let's look at everybody around Netanyahu, and they went person by person, looking for any sort of irregularities, anything that they could get them on. The former chief of staff of the prime minister, they found that
Recording.
it potentially
He recorded it. Why did he record it?
Recorded a
Because
conversation.
Bibi told him to record it because he wanted to get that information.
And how did they also get those recordings? Because they found that the
Right.
chief of staff hadn't maybe not properly divested from a company, and they sequestered the phone on that, and then they found these.
Basically, the
phones.
police used extortion to get information out of these people, which is illegal. And that's what I had my problem with both the legal system and the Attorney General's office, that they employed extortion in order to get people to rat on the Prime Minister. Because they didn't care about the law, they cared about the conviction. And this is where this thing raises a lot of questions with a lot of Israelis who do not trust. And if you knew how they handled these people and how they treated them, and it's not only the chief of staff, also the media, the head of the media, who they brought in a lover of his, some woman they found illegally going through his phone, that he had a relationship with some woman, and they brought her in and made sure that he saw her. This is like looking at the television series.
Don't other
But
countries
that's-
do that as well to try to get people to turn state's witness?
They
so
could do it, but it is thrown out by the courts.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the courts were backing it up because everybody was single-minded on getting rid of Netanyahu. And that's what the problem we have here in
The
Israel.
police
In the
as
case
well.
2000,
The police as well. The police as
In
well.
case 2000, just to bring it back together, is that Netanyahu promised to advance a law
Right.
that would harm the free distribution of Israeli oil. However, that law was never passed.
Correct.
Well,
And in
why?
addition-
It was introduced not by Netanyahu, but by members of the opposition and also members of the coalition who were getting good coverage from Yediot Ahronot in return for this. And Netanyahu voted against it. And not only did he vote against it, he toppled the government over
Toppled
it.
his own government,
Correct.
and by all rights, as you mentioned before, there was no indication that any positive coverage resulted
Right.
for Netanyahu and Yediot Ahronot. So the case 2000, the charges of bribery, basically, and it's a very heavy felony charge of bribery, is for something, a quid pro quo that all sides recognize openly never actually took place. Rather, it was discussed. And not only was it called a breach of trust, but it was called a bribery. And it's very important to understand that in Israel, and I didn't know this, it was explained to me, the definition of bribery in Israel is a different definition than the definition of bribery in the United
Elsewhere.
States. In the United States, in order for something to be called a bribe, a quid pro quo actually has to take place, where one side takes something from the other in return for a specific favor of significant
Each side
value.
receives something.
Right.
Yeah.
In Israel, if you create a situation in which you could later receive a quid pro quo as a result of something that you did, that could be considered
So
a
just in
bribery.
potential, without it
The
actually.
potential for bribery is called bribery in Israeli law, and it's very important to understand that that's the case 2000. In the case 4000, Shaul Elovitch, who is the major stockholder, chairman of Bezek Inc., which is the largest telecommunications company in Israel, also owned the website Walla, another more left-leaning Israeli news site. And basically what Bezek wanted to do was merge with the satellite company Yes. Now, Elovitch was a shareholder in both companies. A merger between those two companies would have benefited Elovitch financially in a very significant way. It should be noted that Israel has a very strong antitrust authority. The antitrust authority was working on this merger for many years, even from before Netanyahu was the prime minister. And the antitrust authority permitted the merger of Bezek and Yes, and it's acknowledged that Netanyahu had nothing to do with the decision of the
He was not
antitrust
involved,
authority.
right.
However, once the antitrust authority decided that it was okay for Bezek and Yes to merge under Israeli law, so Netanyahu, who was concurrently holding the portfolio of the communications minister, had to advance specific regulations in order to facilitate the agreed upon merger. He did so, yet he decided to leverage his power as the prime minister to say, hey, Mr. Elovitch, you see I'm actually doing something that will benefit you. Maybe perhaps you don't have to be so critical
Let's
of
talk.
me and your press.
Right.
You know, and it happens to be that there are actually, Elovitch decided to play ball. And there are long transcripts of conversations, sometimes at crazy hours of the night, in which Netanyahu was calling up and saying, hey, why are you reporting in this way? Or why do you have this story about my wife
There was
Sarah?
pressure
Maybe
coming from,
maybe you can move that story
other-
down. Maybe you
Again,
can kill that
it's very
story.
interesting. I worked for 6 different prime ministers over the years, and not to mention other politicians. All
Spouses were
hours,
involved.
all hours, they would be calling and asking. First off, people have to realize Israel, it's a very close country. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows somebody. I worked for Itzik Mordechai, for example, was former minister
2
of
degrees of
defense.
separation. at the
Exactly,
most.
and I remember I was very new at work. I used to work with foreign media, so when I worked with Itzik Mordechai, this was the first time I was working with Israeli media. So he sends me to the editor of Ma'ariv newspaper to speak to him. Mordechai was just running for Likud, and he wanted to get a lot of good exposure. And he sends me to Yaakov, what was his name? Yaakov Erez, to talk to him to get in some good coverage. So I'm sitting there. Yaakov Erez doesn't know me from Adam, and then tosses me out of there. I was pretty young at the time. He didn't give me the time of day. And I go back to Mordechai, all embarrassed, and Mordechai says, oh, I can't get you to do anything. Picks up the phone. knows the number for his private number for Yaakov Erez. Yankele, first name basis. I need 1, 2, 3. Why are you giving my boy a hard time? And do this. Oh, sure, but it's like I was just giving him a hard time. Let him, get him through the ropes to teach him a lesson. They were having a good time at my expense. But that's Israel. That's Israel. Everybody knows everybody. And a good, by the way, a very good PR person also knows all these people. They worked with them. They were in the army with them together. That's how close Israel is. And so anything that Netanyahu was doing, this was done before. As Kohelet says, nothing new under the sun in any of this stuff. They're very intense. They're back and forth going on. They need their good image.
Well, the Prime Minister also sleeps about 3-4 hours
Right,
at the top. So
right. So
he's on the
it's
phone all night with somebody. So.
And if they call one of these people and they want good media, who doesn't do that?
Right, and this is also the way media plays.
But
Right.
excuse my naivete, but isn't this why people go to Washington or go to Paris or go to all these places? You want access
Right.
either to promote your business or because you know the right people and you can pick up the phone. And I mean, that's a whole very murky gray
Why-
world,
Yeah.
not just in Israel.
Why did these companies hire Gantz or Bogi Elon
Or Ehud Barak,
or
who's
Ehud
now
Barak?
making a
Why did they?
fortune of
Yes.
money.
Why did they hire them? Because of their connections,
Right.
or the sons of Biden's sons, for example. Why did they hire these
Yes,
people?
it's not
Because
just
of their
I
connections.
think it's not just an Israeli thing.
It's
I
not
think it's a
exclusive.
problem.
But in Israel, it's
yeah.
easier because, like we said, everybody
Because
here is
people know each
related
other,
in one way
but-
or another.
What's specifically interesting about the case 2000 and 4000 is that the bribe was considered positive media coverage. Now, everybody knows that works in media knows that media and politicians trade favors. Positive coverage for access, positive coverage for access for
Jordan
students.
Easton, I mean, remember that old story with Saddam Hussein?
Right.
With CNN, I mean, he admitted later that
Yes.
he had
They had a deal.
laid off Saddam Hussein, and he'd lied to the American public for years, basically,
the Iran-
about an enemy, because then he got access, and otherwise he would have gotten tossed. And this is an old story.
Didn't
Anybody going to the Palestinian Authority or to Gaza, you
that-
can't believe any journalism coming out of these places because they're all
But forget that
twisting
place.
it.
Let's
in
take the
order to
United
get
States,
access.
the Iran deal. The
Yeah.
Americans admitted that they were working with the Israeli press and they were giving them and feeding them information to support the administration against the government of Israel. So
So what happens here is that in two of the major cases against Netanyahu, it's the publishers of major media organizations are simultaneously being charged with bribery. It's not only Netanyahu that's
Right.
being
There's
charged.
a lot of money
Also, the
involved.
publishers of these media outlets are being charged with bribery. Now, what's interesting is that the media in Israel, who is intent on getting Netanyahu out of office, is
Yeah.
willing to throw the publishers, their colleagues, under the bus because it
Anything that
feeds their
results in-
interest to
Well, they're
try to
expecting
go
the courts
Netanyahu.
will give them, because the
Leniency.
courts also need good publicity. This is very interesting. The courts in the organization I work for, the Movement for Governability, one of the things we discovered was that in violation of Israeli law, the Supreme Court in Israel was were following Israeli civilians and citizens of Israel on seeing if they had any bad things to say about, and they had files on Israeli citizens who were criticizing the Supreme Court.
How does that
Now, they're
work?
supposed to register.
What's the fear?
It's no fear. They don't want people talking badly about the Supreme Court in
Sounds like a
Israel.
police state.
So they had to, exactly, so they had to expose these, and we came upon it by chance because we were investigating and asking them information on something that was leaked from us inside the Attorney General's office about another file that they had on court candidates, that they were keeping files on judicial candidates and using it against them later on to put pressure on them to find in favor of different files. So these same people, sorry, just finish this thought, these same people, they're letting them know that they need Yediot Achronot and they need Walla, and so they'll probably be lenient with them when it comes down to sentencing.
Let's pull it back to the election because certainly blue and white and the challengers against Netanyahu, are latching on to the charges. And one of the major talking points of the Gantz campaign has been, you're going to have a prime minister that in the morning is getting a security briefing on Syria, and the afternoon meeting with his lawyers. And what does that do to the fabric of Israeli society to have a prime minister that is
Distracted.
facing not just distracted, but as
Yeah.
the moral representative of a nation, also is facing corruption charges in trial, that he should step down, and that if he clears his name, he could
Is he
come
the
back.
moral representative of
Right.
the country?
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
another
good question.
excellent question.
Exactly, this is-
Does anybody expect politicians anywhere today to be the people that we're looking towards for any kind of moral guideline, whether you're religious or not religious? And, and what I find funny is occasionally you'll get a little bleep out from the world around us, from the countries around us, who think this is hysterical. All right, the countries around us that are either being run by absolute monarchs or totalitarian leaders or dictators think what's happening here in Israel is just too funny for words, because they're just doing whatever they want. And, this is maybe over democracy to a certain degree, because we see it in the United States, we see it in European countries. Again,
The
the
Blue and White
leaders are not
campaign-
expected to be
Blue and
great.
White campaign has been hanging billboards in the previous weeks in Tel Aviv and other places, likening Netanyahu to Erdogan. This has been one of the talking points in the
Yeah,
last
he's
week.
going to go down because he accepted cigars. Tell
Well-
that to the king of Saudi Arabia.
Sure.
He'll split a gut laughing.
They're charging that Netanyahu, if he forms a government now, will use that government in order to be able to get immunity from trial.
Right.
And in fact, Netanyahu did try before this election to pass an immunity hearing. It was a little bit of a snafu on his part, because there was no House committee set up in order to consider the immunity request. But Blue and White actually one up them by forcing the formation of a committee, which would in fact reject Netanyahu's parliamentary immunity bid. And Netanyahu, in this gamesmanship that was taking place, then announced that he was going to go to Washington, D.C. to roll out the Peace to Prosperity vision, invited Benny Gantz to come to Washington as well. Now, Gantz accepted a separate meeting with President Trump and refused to be at the press conference as Netanyahu's sidekick, essentially, and flew back to Israel because he said he was going to lead the charge against Netanyahu's immunity bid in the parliament. And the second Benny Gantz gets on the plane to fly back, Netanyahu, recognizing that he wasn't going to get the parliamentary immunity, pulled the bid. And then, kind of like, so you see
Now he's down.
A lot
kind
of
of politics
games.
that are going on here, But the charges and the immunity bids, it's definitely been a part of the narrative of these three elections, and one could very well argue that if it were not for the charges being leveled by the Attorney General against Prime Minister Netanyahu, that we would not be in a third election cycle.
You can argue that.
Because
There's a lot of reasons
Well,
we're
I can
third.
tell
One of
we have-
them is
we
a
have-
Victor Lieberman.
We'll know the
and
first
what's-
indications in about 8 minutes, and I'm hating everybody who's posting on Facebook now, and a lot of them I know are journalists in the know,
Facebook.
and they're all saying there's something dramatic going on, there's something huge
But
going
again,
on
as you
here.
said, for the next few hours, we won't really
I know,
know.
I just-
And sometimes the polls have been so
And I'm
off.
not getting any indication. They're all very, I don't know, are they talking about right wing, left wing? I have no idea.
We'll find out.
I hate all of them.
How's your blood pressure? Do I need to call Earl? Like, you're okay?
No,
Do you
my
need a
blood
pill?
pressure's always
Maybe
up.
have the
No,
corona.
though some left winger that I know, she said that it doesn't matter, which is, I don't know if it's good or not, but she said it doesn't matter, we're all going to die of corona anyway. So
Oh, so if she's not happy, maybe that's
that's what I'm
good.
saying.
go ahead.
No, just one more thing about the cases, and that is the case 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 really seem relatively weak cases, and certainly silly perhaps if the Prime Minister would fall over one of these kind of charges. The most serious case, it seems, was really case 3,000 over the submarine deal, and that perhaps, which would have been most serious in the sense that the Prime Minister would have received some form of money over
Right.
a submarine sale.
Actual-
That actually seemed the most interesting and the most severe in terms of it being an actual crime, which he is not guilty of and has been absolved of, and therefore it's not even correct.
not
No
even on
charges
the
at all.
thing.
So really 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 are, in a sense, as you said, kind of silly.
Yeah.
Right, time will tell with that.
We have about
And
10
the other
minutes.
parties.
We have about 10 minutes until the exit polls, and we haven't yet taken the time to sort of go through all of the parties
Exactly.
that are expected to cross the threshold, and some that
Saying
aren't.
that the poll results are not for the
Okay.
people with a soft heart.
Okay, so we'll know in a few minutes. So let's
What is going on?
let's hold
Okay.
the anticipation for a
So
few
all the
minutes.
cardiology wards are now prepping?
Yeah, I
What's
know.
happening?
It's,
Higher Arab turnout.
Okay, so let's take a
That
look
was
at the.
anticipated.
Yeah.
Maybe
though,
I
that
should
They're going to be the
maybe
third
I should
biggest
post something just so
party.
people think I know what I'm.
Or maybe
I
just
have
turn
some
off
inside
your
information.
Facebook feed.
Let's-
Okay, that's
Let's
another
take a look.
option.
We have a few minutes just to run through the political parties that are expected to create the formation of the next
Are you on
government.
any of the channels there?
Okay, so we mentioned several times Yisrael Beitin.
Yeah.
Avigdor Lieberman. He's basically been the kingmaker of Israeli politics, or so-called kingmaker,
Yeah.
for being the one that's essentially dethroned.
The election maker, that's
Right,
what it
election
was.
maker.
Yeah,
trying to-
because he refuses to go into the coalition.
Trying to dethrone Netanyahu. Now he's Russian, right? He's and his
Moldovan, I
Yes.
think.
Moldovan, and
So-
most of his constituents are Russian
So
Israelis.
former Soviet Union.
From the former Soviet Union. There's over 1 million members of the former Soviet Union that have immigrated to Israel in the 80s and the 90s. And he basically represents them. Now, for a long time, he was considered as far right as anybody in the...
He lives in Gush
political
Etzion.
spectrum,
He
right?
lives in a
lives
so-called
in-
settlement in Ukdim.
Right, in a more isolated settlement at that. Certainly right-wing when it comes to defense. He's claimed to have quit
I don't know.
Netanyahu's
I
government as
don't,
defense
I don't consider
minister.
him a right-winger, but that's me.
Right, he claimed to have quit Netanyahu's government for Netanyahu's overriding him as the defense minister. He wanted to be stricter on Hamas and Gaza, and
So he
perhaps
said.
there's many people that feel that way as well. But when he refused to join Netanyahu's government in April following the elections, he said that the reason why he didn't want to join Netanyahu's government was because Netanyahu's government was backed by the religious parties.
Right.
And it is understood that most of Avigdor Lieberman's constituents who are Russian are very, very secular. They're not very religious.
Some of them are not even, according
are
to
not
Jewish law, Jewish.
Right, let's go into
Because-
that a little
yeah.
bit.
Yeah, well, because the law of return, which is what allows somebody to move to Israel, is if you have one Jewish grandparent. It's basically what the Nazis
According to
did.
Israeli law.
The
Then
Nuremberg
going
laws.
to Israeli law, right. I mean, it's basically what the Nazis had said, is that you went to the ovens if you had one Jewish grandparent, that made you Jewish. And so at the beginning of the state, Ben Gurion and the Yishuv at the time said, anybody can come who's got one Jewish grandparent. It conflicts to a certain degree with Jewish halacha, with Jewish law, because according to Jewish law, you have to, it's matrilineal. So if your Jewish grandparent is your father's father, then you're not considered Jewish. So you can make Aliyah, you can move to Israel, but you are not considered Jewish. And this is actually what bothers me more about Lieberman than almost anything else, including the fact I don't consider him right-wing, because he's willing to give away parts of the Galilee, where a lot of Arabs are sitting, to be part of a Palestinian state. So I don't consider somebody who's willing not just to give away Judea and Samaria, but give away parts of recognized state of Israel from 1948. I don't consider that someone on the right. But what bothers me about him is that he's deepened something in Israel, which to a great has been worked on by a lot of people, which is the religious secular divide. And he has made that worse. He has made a big issue of the fact that the ultra-Orthodox don't serve in the army, even though from where I'm sitting, some of them are going to the army, and there's also a slow integration. These things are not going to happen quickly, but I do see that it's happening. More Hebrew speaking, more core curriculum in their schools. It's going to be a slow process, but it is happening, and he's made it worse again. And that's what bothers
He
me so
certainly
much
stuck
about
his
him.
finger in the eye of like a little bit of a sore point.
Of a
in
very
Israeli
big sore
society.
point, yes.
And the thing is that many people are accusing him of doing so specifically because he was polling issues that would be most effective
In his
and-
sector.
within his sector.
Right,
and,
exactly.
And the reason why he's hitting at the right-wing religious bloc is because they are Netanyahu supporters.
Right.
And it's become very, very clear that Lieberman wants Netanyahu's premiership to be over. And he also understood that the left wing cannot topple Netanyahu, that somebody from the right wing had to
Right.
topple Netanyahu. And so
His
he,
constituents are
he has
to
done
the
that.
right.
And,
Yeah.
But now, he hasn't been pushing so much on the religion and state issues. In the last week, Lieberman said Netanyahu's career is over, right? So he said that. But then he also said that Gantz,
His may be over
he
right
said
now.
that Gantz is unfit to serve as prime minister. So he's basically saying he can't be prime minister.
He can't be prime
prime
minister.
minister. And then he said only I can be the one that understands the political system as well as Netanyahu and to serve. So we understand that somehow or another, even with a very, very small sector of the Israeli public behind him, that Lieberman wants to somehow shoot the moon and go right between the Likud and right between blue
Right.
and white and somehow
Get up there. But he's
You know,
been the
be at the
stick in
top.
the wheels of keeping this going. I mean, my hope, if there is going to be some kind of, oh my God, what we didn't expect
Big
this,
shaking.
is that his party doesn't cross the threshold. Okay, that he's
Never say
no
never.
longer kingmaker, and that would be a real game
Well, just
changer
a
in
few-
terms of the numbers.
just a few weeks ago he was polling at as many as 10 seats. He
I know.
received 8 seats in the last election, and in the latest polls he's down to about 6 seats, which was what he had previously.
Yeah.
So whatever,
Maybe that'll be it.
whatever votes he had gotten from other members of the public that, just looked at him as the one that could overthrow Netanyahu, have sort of went back to where they originally came from.
Well, he's losing his Russian base, so he needs to find voters from other parties, and that's kind of why he's trying to present
we have
himself
one
as
now.
the only alternative.
Now, on the right side, the nationalist camp, you have Yamina, which is led by Naftali Bennett,
Right.
who is currently the defense minister, and the former justice minister, Ayelet Shaked, who's very popular.
Minister of
Rafi
Diaspora
Perez is
Affairs and
number 2 now,
Education Minister, right?
There's been a lot of movement within the nationalist camp, to say the least, over the last year or so. And
All right, I have to release, this is major. Ilana Dayan just released on Channel 2 that this is the biggest day in the life of Netanyahu.
okay, so we'll see.
So we'll
what
see, we
happens.
have less than a minute
a
now.
few minutes.
Someone
left.
gave him cigars? Good cigars? Cuban cigars?
Now,
All right,
now
we'll
in
see what
2000,
happens.
in the first election cycle, so Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked divorced themselves from the traditional Jewish Home Party, which they had led for many years, and they wanted to create a more secular right-wing party called the New Right, and they made a horrific mistake because they failed to cross the 3.25% election threshold, which we talked about earlier in the broadcast, by about 2,000 votes.
Not even, I think
Right.
1,400.
So
yeah.
they basically had 3.96
And all those
seats.
votes went into
and-
the trash.
Right.
Yeah.
The polls are being released now.
Okay, so we're going to take a look to see what it is in a minute. It's going to take us some time to process it too. Okay, well, we'll see. Drum roll.
Okay.
I'm watching
Drum
all 3
roll.
channels now in one of the party
You
centers.
can multitask like that.
In any case, after the first elections, and many argue that had the New Right crossed the threshold.
All right, I
that
see
there would
Likud are
have been-
celebrating. I
One
see
second.
the Likud, they're celebrating right now.
But it's
I don't see what the results are.
just
Don't
exit
forget,
But it could
polls.
be-
Blue and white celebrated quite.
That's
know,
right.
but,
We have been,
uh,
we've
We've been there
seen
before.
this movie
We've been there before.
before
I wanna
where
see what the
people went to
dramatic
sleep
is. I want
saying,
to see what
you
drama
know,
they're talking about.
people went to sleep with one government, woke up with
I'm
another,
interested to know what
so.
voter
See
turnout
who's the
was.
first one
Yes.
who posts. But
Yeah.
they're holding their head for some reason.
No one's saying anything yet. Yeah.
Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing bloc wins majority according to exit polls. This is what we're seeing here.
That could still change.
Yeah, everything
That
can
can
change.
change.
I mean, we remember in April,
Yeah, I
in
don't
the first
trust-
election, that you saw the 4 leaders of the
I'd
Blue
rather
and White
celebrate the
Party.
next morning.
The four
Right.
leaders of the Blue and White Party were on stage
Celebrate at
celebrating.
breakfast, not at midnight.
It looked that they had 36 seats.
Gantz
that they
gave a
had,
victory speech.
Right, Gantz gave a victory speech, and then it became clear as more and more votes were counted that that 36 to 33, or became 36 to 34, 36 to 35, and that it wasn't so clear. So what we are about to find out in the coming moments is that what we see now might not be the final.
Not
Well,
at
if
all,
the
and
faces
I
of the broadcasters on Israel Channel 2 are any indication, they look like they're in mourning.
Well, in that
So I'm
case-
pretty
So-
happy right now.
So I just have to say, before we know who's going to be running the country, that the people who have our future in their hands for the next few years, those 120 people are doing it for the right reasons. We've been talking about ego and corruption and all this kind of stuff. Because we're a democracy, we 9 million people put a lot of faith into those 120 who have to make decisions that are very often life and death decisions. Do we go to war? Do we not? Who are our friends? Who aren't? And that they come from a place, a righteous place, and not from a place that's good for themselves and not for the people. We've fought too hard and too long for this country to be in the hands of people who are interessantim, as we say.
Yeah. I'd like to see
And,
a strengthening foreign policy as well, with
foreign policy,
better relationship
yes.
with the countries surrounding us.
Exactly, which can happen, but it comes from a place of strength and from
Correct.
self-respect.
Correct.
We're a Jewish
Strong
country,
win-
we are not
strong
going
win-
anywhere,
win
we'll
for
hold
Likud.
out our hands to anybody in peace, but we're not going anywhere.
Are you filling out the exit polls now?
Yeah, the first polls from Channel 12 are in.
37 for Likud.
37 for Likud, 35 for Blue and White.
35.
33. 37 for Likud, 33
Yeah,
for
but the
Blue
block.
and White. 14
Okay.
for the
Arab
joint
list, that's up there,
1 second. Shas is 9.
okay.
Yamina is 7.
What about
United Torah Judaism is 7. Okay, got
the
that
Arabs
also.
got 14, that's it?
Labor Meretz got only 7.
So words Yisrael
Yisrael
Beitenu.
gets 6. So hold on.
So this
They
is
haven't
holding?
got it raised yet.
Because it has to equal 100.
So what's so dramatic about this?
Hold on.
Well,
has
one of
been
the
up
polls
all
have
day.
37-32 now.
Shas says 9.
Let's see.
And having Yamina.
Shas received
I don't
9.
care.
Hold on.
I do.
Hold on.
It's
Let
my
me tell you if
guys.
I got it right.
Can I jump
So
up and down right now?
Likud
No.
37, blue and white 33. Joint list 14. Yamina is 7. United Torah Judaism 7.
Shas to 9, you said?
Shas is 9. Labor Meretz at 6.
Yeah,
Oh, no, Labor
percent.
Meretz at 7. Oh,
Well, they also didn't percent.
Oh, that's
there you
why.
go.
And
Yeah.
Otzma
Okay, so
didn't,
that's the
as
first
everyone
one.
said.
okay. And it says that.
So what's the,
All right,
Shocked,
Channel 13.
because this-
That's I don't know either. Channel 13 have Likud at 37, blue and white
Hold on.
32.
Wait. Do it slow for me. I'm going to type it in as you said. You were talking about channel 13.
Channel's 13 now.
Okay.
Likud 37,
37. Yeah.
blue and white 32.
32. Okay.
Arabs.
Arab list 14.
14.
That's all
Good.
Shas 9. But we
Shas
still
9.
have Israel Beitenu are 8.
Israel.
They're up to 8?
Beitenu
Wow.
Is
But
8.
What?
Okay.
um,
Who else?
so what's
Yehudot
Amit
Torah,
Segal
8.
saying?
8. Good. Yamina?
Avodah Meretz
Yeah.
6
6.
and Yamina 6.
And Yamina 6.
The right wing now has 60. This
Well,
is
let's
without.
emphasize that.
This is without the
Okay,
right
we'll
wing
see
has
a second.
6.
Do we have the channel 11 poll? Is that one?
I'm looking through these reports.
So
from the
Amit
media
Segal,
from-
who we mentioned
Yeah,
before,
what's so dramatic about this?
has Likud at 36, the blue and white at 33, the Arab list at 15.
Which
This is Amit
Channel-
But
Segal.
this is without
Channel
the
12,
military
he's-
vote
Yeah,
yet. which
this
Oh,
is
here
channel
we go.
11.
Go
Here
right
he's got
wing.
channel 11.
Oh, so read me
He's
the
got
channel
all
11.
3.
Hold
He's
on.
got channel 11.
Yeah, we have it here too.
Likud 36, blue and white 33.
Wait, hold on. Where's my mouse? Okay. All right. Likud got 36 according
Yeah,
to the channel?
according to 11,
Yeah.
channel 11.
Blue and white?
Blue and
Yeah,
white
I'm here.
33.
Yes.
Arab list 15.
15.
Avodah, Labor Merit 6.
Labor Merit
Wow, they
6.
really dropped.
Shas 9.
Shas 9.
United Torah Judaism 8.
8.
Yamina 7.
Seven.
And Lieberman 6.
6.
Polls are
Okay.
very similar.
So,
And channel 12
Which
now
gives the right 60.
They tend
is
to be.
37.
so here's what we have in the blocks, okay? This is magic, okay?
They're all
Working on this all day.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh,
the
like
blocks
this.
have
Pretty.
all 3 blocks, all 3 exit
All
polls
three
showing
He's one
60
away.
seats for the pro-Bibi camp and 45 seats for the pro-Gantz camp. And I included in that Yisrael Beitenu because we have all indications that he would have possibly recommended Gantz.
Gantz.
We have to
He's not
take
gonna
that
join
into
Likud.
consideration. I mean, we'll see. But basically,
That's one thing that is great about Bibi. He doesn't keep a grudge against anybody. He'll go to Lieberman. He'll offer him to join.
Mutual interests.
Well, it's all about interest. Yeah, correct.
All about
So-
interests.
The personal grudge might be there, but the political.
No,
interest,
he looks at one thing. He cares about the state of Israel and his vision of what he wants Israel to be, and that's what he tries to advance. He ignores everything else. I spoke to him last June. It was the day after his wife was fined in court. And he said the only thing that bothers him is the fact that his family is involved, are brought into this, and his wife is attacked. And he said that's hard for him,
That does bother him.
but he tries to focus on the goal of doing for the state of Israel.
Correct.
Um,
So let's talk about the numbers for a minute. I mean, we're talking 60 now, but of course that can go up or down easily, 1 or 2.
I mean, and as we
For
saw, I
anyone.
think in both the April and the September elections, the results that the Likud had in
Right.
both those elections rose over the hours that followed. Okay,
And also the
remember-
soldiers
Right.
tend to go right if they haven't been
Right.
counted into this yet.
Right.
I mean, they're not going to add too much to either the ultra-Orthodox parties or the Arab list, let's
True.
put it that way.
Right.
So that's also can make or break. They've added a seat here and there.
You know, and I think what's very noteworthy is that in the September elections, so blue and white received 33 seats, and basically they've maintained the support that they had in
Interesting.
September. But the Likud in September scored 32 seats.
Mhm.
And we see now that they have a 4 to 5 seat increase over what they had previously. And the question is, where did that come from? You know, where did those extra votes come from? So the joint list received only 13 seats in September. So they're potentially up 1 or 2 votes. Shas was 9 in September, so they basically stayed the same.
Yeah.
Yisrael Beitenu was 8, so they're
Stay there.
They could
potentially
be got a
down,
couple from
potentially
them.
down a few. United Torah Judaism was 7, so they're about the same as they were. Maybe they picked up a
Maybe one.
seat.
Shas.
Shas was 9, as we said. Yamina was 7 in the last round, so here they
Pretty much the
so
same.
too, pretty much the same. And what's interesting is that in September, Labor and Gesher and the Democratic Union, which is Meretz, ran in separate
Right.
blocks, and between the two of them, they scored 11. And
So
in
they're
this,
down
they're
collectively.
basically down collectively 4 to 5 seats.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very, very interesting. And in fact, you could, if you wanted to look at one place where votes have shifted from one side to the other, the far left of the spectrum is moving from 11 down to 7 or 6,
Right.
and the Likud is jumping up from 32 possibly to
But I don't
37.
think those votes went from them to the Likud. I would guess that
Exactly.
those votes went to blue and
Those
white,
went to
and
blue and white.
but some blue and white votes bled out to the
Yeah.
Likud.
Ben-
That went that way.
Benjamin
We talked about
Netanyahu
Arab
just posted a heart and thank you on
Yeah.
his personal.
Let's talk a little bit about
Site.
the Arab list, because right now, they're the 3rd largest party.
These are big numbers.
Yeah.
Compared to past, I mean.
Those are very big
Compared
numbers.
to recent years, past elections.
That's
they've
the
never
third
been
biggest
interested.
party.
You've never had a big Arab voter turnout. And now you're looking at big numbers, which I don't know if you can say that's Netanyahu's fault or not, but I know Netanyahu made it an issue, I think it was in April, did he make it, was that when he
Yeah.
made it an issue?
We don't
Right,
remember.
warning that the, I
But
don't
it
remember which
could,
one already.
but it could be that some Meretz and Labor votes went to the Arab Party, because
Could
they
be.
used to garner a lot of Arab votes,
Right,
and it
right.
could be that the
Went back to
Arabs
the Arab
went
Party.
into the Arab Party
Could be.
and lost faith in Meretz and
Well,
Labor.
Yeah.
in April, the joint list ran in 2 separate blocks, one between Chadash and Tal, and the other between Ram and Balad. 4 parties that now are running as a single list ran in 2 separate lists. And in April, those two separate lists received 10 votes. Okay?
You know,
Come
yeah.
September, the joint list ran together because the Balad party almost fell off. They
Right.
just barely crossed the threshold, and they knew they shouldn't do that again if they can consolidate their power to make sure everybody gets in. The joint list,
They weren't supposed to get in, by the way. That's where the
Exactly,
the
we talked
cheating
about
came
that
involved.
earlier.
They were supposed to be dropped.
so
to drop out.
they almost missed it, right? And they learned their lesson, and they got together. And in September, they received 13 seats. So you see,
so
they went
they're-
from 10
They're
to
definitely
13
strengthening.
to 14 or 15 in the course of a year, and that's really
That's a lot.
because the Arabs had not traditionally gone out to vote, but are all of a sudden realizing that their vote can have a significant
So that's
impact.
good that they're becoming democratic Israelis
Right.
on
I
that
mean, I don't think it's
level.
because of the efforts of Ahmed Tibi, I
On
think
one
it's because of the efforts of Bibi Netanyahu.
Right.
But I'm going to throw out something that I hope that, obviously it's not my constituency, but I would hope that the leaders, the members of Knesset that represent the Arab population in Israel now, are better than they used to be. I have found that the members of Knesset are much more radical, that a lot of Arab Israelis are trying to integrate into Israel. They understand the benefits of being Israeli as opposed to what's going on in the rest
That
of
became
the
clear when the
Middle
peace
East.
plan was
It
released.
became very
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
They may not sing Hatikva with the same fervor as
That's
I
okay.
think it,
That's
but they
okay.
understand the benefits of being Israelis and being free. And I have found, I don't know if you guys agree with me, that their members of Knesset in the past have tried to radicalize them, have done things that are antithetical to Israel, or even spied, if I'm not mistaken, against Israel. And I would really hope that this time they get leadership that is looking to integrate them and looking to make them more loyal Israelis. I mean, I even think there should be national service for Arabs and for everybody in this country. Not everybody can go into the army, and this has been one of the big issues. We haven't really discussed it, except for what Lieberman has tried to foment, against the ultra-Orthodox. But I think everybody in this country should do something for this country. You want to quote JFK? Go ahead. Ask not. Ask what my country can do for me.
There is a movement.
And so
Israelis
maybe some of these Arab MKs right now will understand that this
That
is
I-
their
No, that's not
country.
gonna- that's not gonna happen.
That's a hope. I'm
That's
putting
the
it
case,
out there.
No, but I do believe actually that there are Arab Israelis that would like to contribute to this country, but there's a fear factor in their society and they're not able to.
So that's
contribute.
shifting.
So-
That's shifting now.
It's
There's a
shifting
lot. They're
slowly,
opening up. They're
slowly.
saying that.
Especially
They're
among
mem-
Christian Arabs.
it's
Especially
also
among Christian Arabs
Muslims.
who are
It's also
joining.
Muslims.
But
It's
I'm
also
talking here
Muslims.
specifically about the Muslims, because
Right.
the Christian Arabs have already woken up to that, and to a great
The
degree.
more they see
and
what's
realize
happening in
that.
Gaza, the more they see what's happening in Judea and Samaria and
Syria,
Palestinian-controlled areas, and not to
Jordan,
mention Syria
anywhere,
and other places,
Lebanon.
they appreciate this place. The leaders don't look for, because that's their whole raison d'etre, is what they do. The only way of undermining that is encouraging the others, to open up, speak freely. I would say lower the threshold so the Arab parties fight against themselves and lower their influence, which will give more influence for those Arab Israelis who want to be part of Israeli society. And listen, within Likud, there are 3 Arabs who ran, a Muslim, and I'm not even talking about Druze anymore, as putting
Right.
them in that category,
No.
Christian and a Muslim who ran in, two Muslims and a Christian who ran for places there, and one of them could very well get elected, not in a special seat allocated to a minority in
Right,
Israel,
but on his
but
own.
as a legitimate
But
person
it's
elected.
also, there's a fear factor within their society,
Right.
being rejected from their society. I mean, we have cases of people who tried to join the army and then were thrown out of their homes and went back to their village in the Galilee and were really, and their families were also,
Right.
which is very difficult in a very tribal situation, their families were also
the-
delegitimized.
And
So
these
they've got a
Zawahiri's
cultural
nephew was very
issue.
pro-Israel.
Yeah, so they've got cultural issues here that have to be overcome from within their own society. But I think, I
That
would,
could change.
like I said,
But
I
that's
hope
not
it
new.
changes. It's not new.
Wait, no, I'm saying
Not
it's
new
not
at
new,
all.
the involvement in Israeli society. Take the Bedouin, for example, who are Muslims, and they were part of the society, accepted. But
Best
it's interesting.
trackers we had in the army.
But you see what's happened in the past decade was that organizations funded by Europeans,
Yes.
left-wing liberal organizations, were going into these villages and setting them against the government of Israel.
Not to
against-
mention the jihadists who've gone in there, some of the
You
extreme
know what? I can
Islamic
understand that.
people
That can
doing
be
that.
thwarted. I'm talking about supposed organizations, civil rights organizations,
all know
who are
that.
encouraging them to turn around and inciting them against the government of Israel. And this is one thing that I had a problem with the right wing being here, that they're not exerting our authority and our sovereignty, including in these kind of cases, and stopping these organizations from undermining the stability
And
of Israeli
building
society.
wherever they want and all kinds of
Exactly,
things.
and encouraging them to do that. So you have them on one hand. On the other hand, you have a party like Likud, which is encouraging them to join the Likud and be part of the party there and run for office in that.
Right.
The more that happens, the more you're going to have the situation where Israeli Arabs become part of Israeli society.
Can we talk
Yeah.
about the right-wing agenda, I guess? Now,
Yeah.
let's say we've got a 60-number right-wing coalition here that Netanyahu is able to pull together a coalition. His first promise was he would announce Israeli sovereignty.
Apply
At least on the
Apply
Jordan Valley for
sovereignty,
starters.
At least on the
Right.
Jordan Valley.
Well, that was
right?
yesterday.
Yeah.
That was yesterday. That was before the election.
So do we think he's going to do it? Is he going to be
Well, I would
involved?
really
Let's
hope
talk
he
a little
would.
about this because this relates to President Trump and his
Deal of the
administration's
century.
deal of the century, the peace to prosperity vision. Now, the way this works is that in order for anybody to come to the table, it says right at the beginning that Israel gets to apply its sovereignty over every single Jewish community. That includes a settlement or an outpost or what they call wildcat outpost or anything like that in Judea and Samaria. Every Jew that lives in Judea and Samaria, the ground on which he lives will become part of the greater Israel immediately, such that every settlement will have the same status as Tel Aviv. Now, when the rollout happened in the White House, so basically that they said that Israel will be able to apply immediate sovereignty. And Benjamin Netanyahu immediately after the press
There's a
conference said,
misunderstanding.
I'm going to hold a cabinet meeting on Sunday and I'm going
Yeah.
to apply sovereignty immediately.
Right. He
Oops.
resolved that. He
There was a
resolved
little
that by
bit of
canceling the cabinet.
Right.
a little bit of, so
His
basically
calendar was full.
what
Yeah.
was determined was that there is now a mapping process that is taking place. There's a 6-member mapping committee with 3 Israelis that includes
Ambassador.
U.S. Israeli Ambassador to the United States Ron Dermer,
Right.
Ronan Peretz, who's the chief of staff, the acting
Director General.
of the Prime Minister's office, and Yair Levin, who's
Yariv.
Yariv Levin,
Yeah.
who's the
Minister-
tourism
Minister of
minister,
Tourism.
And a
also
lawyer, which is
oil,
important.
and also a Netanyahu
And
lawyer
it's, right.
on that side. And then on the American side, you have American Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, his chief of staff, Aryeh Lightstone, and Scott Fight, who has been involved with the communications with the Palestinian Authority. So right now, what they're doing is they're converting what was at first called a conceptual map. I mean, it was held up, it was presented right away, conceptual map of more or less where, which areas would be Israel, which areas would be set aside for the potential formation of a Palestinian state in the future. However, to turn that conceptual map into a technical map means in some cases going meter by meter.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so this is a process that is already started and is expected to take many weeks, if not a few months, to take place. And once that is finished, a Netanyahu government will most definitely apply sovereignty to those areas.
People have to understand why this, because some people were saying, oh, this is just a way to waste time, and so Netanyahu's not challenged over this. People have to realize that we take history, for example. We've heard, those who are familiar with the topics here or issues, the Green Line. What was the Green Line? Green Line was after the war in 1948, and the war ended beyond the borders that were allocated in the partition plan. And so
It's an armistice line.
the armistice line. But what happened was the green line was literally a green marker that they drew on the map, and it was a heavy green marker. So when it come down on the ground, you had areas that on the map were very small, but it came out to hundreds of meters on the ground itself. So you had no man's land in Jerusalem, for example. The whole area between the King David Hotel and the Old City was no man's land because that's where the marker.
The area where the American embassy is now was also part of that no man's land.
So those things have a reason, and I give them credit for this, for thinking even to that level of detail they went down into, that you have to work that out. Now, if you take another thing that just recently was done, that's all relative here, the barrier that was placed, the fence that was placed after the attacks almost 20 years ago. This year will be 20 years since the Oslo War began, and the barrier that came up 4 years later, which ended the terrorist assault against Israeli civilians. Again, you had it placed along some of the places were set along the Green Line, and other places it was for security interests, which is fine until the Supreme Court in Israel started getting involved, and you started having petitions. And this, we can expect that even if the government makes that determination, that they finish with it very quickly with where this supposed border is supposed to be, they'll start petitioning, because the Supreme Court opened itself up that any person in Israel or outside of Israel can petition the courts in Israel. Expect a lot of these left-wing groups are already getting the money to petition the courts in Israel to start challenging this line. So even if we do claim sovereignty over this, it may be challenged in the court very quickly.
There could be a fight in certain areas.
Be a huge fight here, and this is the essence of the battle right now in Israel, is between the judicial and the government, the legislative, and they're going to do everything to undermine, especially this government now.
Sure.
And if it's any indication of what I'm seeing from friends on the left wing here, they are not happy with the results. They're talking about a civil war. They have really exaggerated everything. No, everything they were saying up until the elections, you can excuse for saying, okay, they're trying to get an advantage for the elections. If tonight they're not putting down the same kind of language, there's a huge problem with these people. And
because this is their Messiah. Oslo is their religion, and
that's a very good
creating and as we know, religious people do things for their religion that are not rational.
They refuse to accept its failure.
They refuse to accept its failure. They refuse to accept the fact that the Palestinian Authority is another failed authority, and that we didn't get peace. You talk about the Oslo wars, that all we're getting is terrorism. And so at least, look, I happen to not like the map. I think it's a very problematic map, the way it stands now, because some places are very, very isolated and not safe. But I think we have to start somewhere. And the first thing that we have to do, talk about self-respect, is say these people are Israeli, and these areas are going to have Israeli law on them. And I'm not even talking about ideology. I'm talking about on a day-to-day, that the roads should be better, that there should be policemen stationed in this area instead of the army. Now in many of these areas, if there's a car accident, the army shows up. That's not a normal thing to happen. The police should show up. All right? And there's a lot of things having to do with the environment, a lot of different issues that have to be dealt with, that have not been dealt with for over 50 years. And at least, straighten that out, because
and it's easy for governments to give it to the military responsibility, so
That's
they don't
right.
have to deal with it.
Well, right now the defense minister is the one who controls Judea and Samaria, and that's an absurd situation.
Well, you have a
So
problem
there's a
when
lot
the
of things to be put into
When the
play.
military serves, so you know that we have conscripts that are 18-year-olds, and by the time they're
Like
21,
my kids.
by the time they're 21, they're finished. And what that means is that the people that are patrolling Judea and Samaria are constantly rotating. Right?
Yes.
When you have police, like in Jerusalem neighborhoods, there's 250,000 plus Arabs living in neighborhoods in Jerusalem, but the police that work in those areas have worked there for a long time. So you
That's
develop
right.
relationships.
And they
and they're
speak
professional.
Arabic, and they know
That's
what they're
right.
doing. Or you have, like around the old city of Jerusalem, you have the Magav, you have the border policemen, which is for a long time, I've been saying, get the army out of Judea and Samaria. Our soldiers need to know how to fight the wars on our borders against our enemies, real wars, not the terrorism and not the urban warfare that we've had to deal with in Judea and Samaria. Although I do have to say, Danny, that I think that it's not the wall that has also stopped the terrorism. I think a lot of it is the intelligence and getting the
of
intelligence
course.
back, because we had given it up to Palestinian Authority and they were just tipping the terrorists off or aiding and abetting. So there's a lot of different pieces here. But I think we have to start somewhere. We keep being reactive. And Israel has to finally say,
initiative.
look, 1 out of every 10 Israelis lives over that so-called Green Line, when you include Jerusalem. 10% of Israeli Jews live in disputed areas. It's enough. It's enough.
Right.
It's not just a few people on some isolated hill.
So what are the mechanics of this? Basically, in return for Israel being able to declare its sovereignty over all the areas that Jews currently live, plus the immediate surroundings, and creating contiguous zones, Israel will agree for a period of 4 years to freeze any building outside
those
of that
zones.
territory, which includes all of what is considered now areas A and B, and parts of area C, which are being apportioned as land that can possibly be created as a Palestinian state in the future.
And this is
Right.
the big
Big if.
thing,
Right,
if
if.
they follow certain conditions. And for once, we have to hold them to that. You know, I remember when Oslo was signed, or when we left Gaza, and I remember people on the left saying, don't worry, we can walk this back. All right, 1 shot out of Gaza and we'll go back in. Okay, how many rockets and missiles and God knows what have been pouring out of Gaza in the last 20 years? You have a population around Gaza that has been living under missile fire for way too long. And this is something that is never discussed and is really, I think, appalling that Israel has allowed so many civilians to be living under warfare for such a long time. And so, but of course we didn't go back into Gaza. And I mean, we've had to have a couple wars. We lose 100 soldiers, we lose some civilians, and then Hamas is back in the seat again.
Well,
you know,
this is
so
different in
this
the
has
sense-
to be changed.
And
part
one-
of-
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the major fundamental building blocks of this plan is that no Jewish civilians should be expelled or
Right.
removed, or
That's
Arabs
nice.
for that matter. That no population should be transferred at all.
But
Just
they have
make-
to stop the
just to make that-
terrorism.
to make it clear when they're talking about that there was a whole demonstration here about Israeli Arabs being moved. Nobody's talking about moving anybody.
Right.
They will become citizens of a Palestinian state or whatever
If they
develops.
choose.
The border will
If they
change.
Well,
choose.
the border will change.
It's not a border
Well,
anyway.
It's not even
there
a
is
border
line-
anyway.
There is a
Future
line in
border.
the Peace to Prosperity that says that it could be up for discussion that some towns, if they wanted to be included in a
It's a
Palestinian
design,
state,
yeah.
could be included. But of course, we saw immediate protest because
But I
Arabs-
thought we were an apartheid state
Yeah,
that is
but this-
oppressing
but
them and they
this
don't want to
time-
leave Israel.
But
I
this
don't
time
get
they
it.
have to earn it. They're not just going to get it because they deserve it,
Right.
which of course
Well, this
historically
is- yeah.
speaking is a load of. You know, they have to earn it. They have to show. They have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Which I think, as we all know, any of us who know anything about Islamic and Arab mentality, they're not going to be able to do because, as you mentioned culturally before, that is a betrayal of their values. But that'd be a nice place to start, that they recognize our existence.
They
If
also have to be-
Abbas is replaced, let's say, by someone like Mahmoud Dahlan, then maybe that could happen. Mahmoud
You think?
Dahlan is more open
Yeah.
to recognizing Israel. Someone like that you actually could
But,
have.
but why do we need their recognition? That's the
We
whole
don't
thing.
No, it's just
But-
part of this
but-
plan.
that's part of the
Forget
plan.
about the
Just
plan.
part
The
of the
plan.
plan.
What we should be concentrating on, and the thing that Israel didn't do for all these years is, let's take care about our own interests. Whatever they
Exactly.
do, let them do it. It's not our responsibility.
Let's be
We don't care.
proactive.
We don't care about them. They keep talking about, the oppression, etc. Europe, even now, right now, from Turkey, there are millions, literally millions of refugees leaving Arab countries. Egypt, by the way, Gaza itself.
Syria.
They're leaving because they're under the control of Hamas. The only place where there are no Arab refugees leaving is those who are under the control and under the state of Israel. And people aren't paying attention to this because here you have an open border. They can leave if they want to. None of them are leaving. And when they're offered
Well,
the
that's what we said.
opportunity
They
of
have a
being
good
part
life.
of, they're even talking about it. These same people who last year were demonstrating against the law, the basic
Nation
law of
state
the
law,
nation
yeah.
state law of the state of Israel, they were flying Palestinian flags in Tel Aviv against this law because they don't want this to be a Jewish state. Suddenly now they said, all right, you'll be part of the Palestinian. You're not moving, you're staying in your place, but you'll be part of the Palestinian. No, they don't want that either. And it's not only because of they're getting the benefits of Israeli society, of social security, etc. They know that this place is much better. None of them want. By the way, I've always said we shouldn't be speaking about sovereignty now in Judea and Samaria, because if you say that, it's going to encourage them to stay. Because if they know that there's going to be a Palestinian state, they know they're at one point or another they're going to be under Hamas. Not that the PLO are any better, but if they're under Hamas, none of them want to be there. There are tens of thousands of people escaping Gaza, leaving to Europe to get out of it, to get out of control of the Hamas.
I think
the
we just
same
have to
thing
have
with the
patience
Judea
and
Samaria.
wait. When
Yeah,
Abbas dies, you're
patience.
probably going to see a civil
Oh,
war between
yes.
Hamas and the PLO.
Even people within
So
the
let's
PLO.
wait it out.
You're saying Dahalan. You know how many people within the PLO oppose Dahalan
I'm aware.
himself?
I'm aware. of
So
it.
Yeah.
they're going to be
Well, what
killing
this
each
plan
other.
does, though, for the first time, it actually comes down on the side of Israel, as opposed to all past plan. Every single past plan always came down on the Palestinian side, adopted the Palestinian narrative. This, for the first time, recognizes Israel's rights to disputed territory, number
Yes,
one.
yes.
And number two, it also puts pressure on the Palestinians to fight incitement for the first
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
And
It's
to
not
become
only-
completely
And terrorism.
And
demilitarized.
complete, well,
And
yeah,
even
Yeah,
Gaza
we can't
needs to
believe we
become-
can't trust that. But
Stop
it came
paying
down on the
terrorists.
Palestinian side, but not in empowering them. But, oh, we have to understand they're incapable of controlling them. We have to work. We always
it was
consider-
babying the
babying them,
Palestinians,
exactly, in a way
They're
that make them
incapable
say
for
they
the
don't have to do it.
Palestinians.
They have no responsibility. That's unacceptable. Now you're saying, okay, you get responsibility.
responsibility.
Now you can either screw it up or you can make it work.
Mm-hmm.
It's all up to you. And it's not babying them anymore. Listen, they are not a
You want
minority.
to be a state,
They're-
prove you deserve it.
They're part of a billion strong Muslim majority in this entire region that stretches from the Western Sahara all the way over into Asia, Central Asia. They don't need to be pampered. They can take control. Now, none of these
Or not.
countries are actually functioning, especially the Arab countries among the Muslim countries. They're not functioning, but why is that our responsibility?
Exactly.
I wrote an article about this. And you have a lot of leftists. You have Dan Shapiro, and you have Aaron David Miller, and you have David
Ross.
Makovsky and Dennis Ross. They're all complaining about this plan because
They
it
are.
takes the Israeli side and clearly is biased.
But
And
here I
Was,
say,
was
it's not
Israel
taking the Israeli
created in
side.
order to create a Palestinian state? Because sometimes that's the feeling that you get. It's like, we have to do that. That's our mandate. No, our mandate is to create a safe and secure and vibrant and functioning, incredible country for the Jewish people.
Well, that's my problem.
Which we've
with
already done.
Anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism because people claim, well, they have all these complaints about Zionism. Well, the fact is that people seem to care only about Palestinians. They don't seem to care about creating states for other people. And I think Peter Boehner made this argument during this debate that I was talking about, in which he claims to care only about human rights and the Palestinians are suffering and therefore they deserve a state. But he forgets that there are so many other people around the world who are also suffering
That's right.
from lack of human rights, and for some reason only focused on the Palestinians. So,
Right.
no, Israel, of course, was
And
not
they've been
created
outed,
for
of
that
course,
reason.
like with BDS, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement, which doesn't help the Arabs, the people that end up losing their jobs when companies are closed because they're functioning over the Green Line. They don't care about that. It's definitely to hurt Israel, not to help Arabs.
Correct.
And that's like their
Correct.
big dirty secret that's also been outed. But we have to keep
But here
discussing it.
another-
And hopefully this government, if we are going into a more national government, if it's, if he gets to 60, 62, if he steals some people away from blue
Well, we
and
hope that
white,
goes
whatever
up.
ends up
Yeah.
happening, hopefully that'll be their stand.
But there's another element in this that we're forgetting. That's the Arab world. And they're being brought in this also in another way. And this a lot has to do with what Netanyahu has been doing for the past decade, is strengthening our connection with the Arab world. Now, people have to realize that the Palestinian cause is only there because it serves an Arab interest against the existence of Israel.
Right.
The Arabs are fed up with the Palestinian cause now. The Palestinians have been complaining. They even withdrew the vote that they wanted to have at the United Nations because the
Sure.
Arabs weren't
There's not enough
supporting
support.
them.
Well, weren't
This
there
was-
ambassadors from Arab countries in the room when Trump announced
Yes.
the plan?
Sure.
And that's exactly.
That's
Bahrain,
amazing.
There are many reasons for that. Number one, this has been the Netanyahu doctrine for many, many years, that he always fought against the concept that if you solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you solve all the other conflicts. He said, no,
It's
the
not
other
the
way
core.
around.
Exactly.
It works outside in. And you mentioned
That's right.
that the Arab nations had been using Palestinians as pawns in a war of attrition against Israel. But what happened? Netanyahu has made this country stronger and stronger over the last 10 years. And what happened? The Arabs see that the Palestinians cannot defeat the state of Israel. So basically the pawn becomes useless because the pawn is going now against the king, and it doesn't work.
So that's why I'm not worried about a Palestinian state. It's not going to happen because it's not in the interest of the Arab world. They understand it. It does more to undermine their stability than it does to undermine Israel. And I say if we do have to deal militarily with Hamas eventually, which we will have to do, it'll be better to do it when the rest of the world and the Arab countries understand that we have no other choice. We can't move on in the Middle East without that happening, and they support Israel's efforts instead of both undermining the stability of that bond between Israel and the Arab countries and the ability of Israel to handle them and in a decisive manner.
Now, Netanyahu has campaigned on very heavily in the last several weeks on the implementation of this plan. And he tried to suggest that even though Benny Gantz ran to Washington and gave his tepid approval for the rollout, that he would not implement the sovereignty. And when you actually take a look at the plan itself, you recognize that this is a plan that's been worked on for many years. You're holding a copy of the plan right there. And Benjamin Netanyahu and his ambassador to Washington, D.C., Ron Dermer, have their fingerprints all over this plan. And this plan is very much representative of
As do
the
many other
Netanyahu,
people, by
of
the way,
course.
many advisors and very bright
Dory
people.
Dole, that's right. And,
Right.
and an incredible team in the United States that includes David Friedman and Jason Greenblatt, who recently stepped down as his post, and of course Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and the special advisor to the president, have all worked on this plan. And if you take a look piece by piece of the plan, it basically goes to unwind all the misconceptions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and specifically to unwind all the problematic aspects of the Oslo peace plan, and yet package to look as another version of an Oslo peace plan.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's also important to take a look a little bit about the timing. Not only the timing of the rollout, but also the timing of the implementation. Because you could ask a very serious question, which is, why did the U.S. administration put pressure on Israel to roll out the peace plan during an election cycle? And there are some significant reasons why they did that. Number one, because we know that there's a mapping process now that's going to take several weeks to a few months, and we are now building up towards the next election cycle, which is hopefully in November in the United States, right? Okay, and the Trump administration wanted to make sure that their administration would be in power, no matter what, even if they would somehow lose the election in November. To enable Israel to apply its sovereignty and to receive the American veto at the UN when the Western
Therein, by the way, is the answer to your question from before: is Netanyahu going to do this or not?
So is he?
Yes, he is. Absolutely, he has between now and November to finish it.
Right.
Maybe he'll have a little more, but we can't take that chance.
I hope so, because still in the back of my head is the fact that when, he still had his Bar Ilan speech where he calls for the Palestinian state, and when we had the so-called the expulsion disengagement, so he was for it with 14
Again, why did he do it? Why did he do it? Because he was Minister of Finance. He knew Israel was in the midst of a financial.
I just hope that
needed
this
to
time
save
he
Israel's
says
economy,
what he
which
was
he
going
did.
to do.
Right,
I
there
just
are certain
hope that this
misgivings that
time.
people have.
Yes, but right now you have an
holding that back
administration
a
in the
little
United
bit.
States is going to pressure him because this will be their crowning achievement.
Okay.
And especially if Trump
So
is
he's
out in
going
November.
to do it because the Americans are pushing him. to this.
No, he's going to do it because it's the time for Israel to do this. He was given,
Okay.
and he understands that the Israeli electorate, this was something very important for the people electing him. If he needs to get elected again and he doesn't do this, he's not going to get people's votes. They gave him the vote this time to get him into office precisely for these kind of things.
Well, I hope
All
that,
right.
number one,
I
the
hope
trials
so.
don't get in the way of any kind of decision making.
Obviously.
That's really an
That's a
important
big
point.
thing
For
hanging
sure.
over.
We're going to be in a political circus. I mean, if we're riding a
100%.
circus, I mean, once
Yeah.
the trials begin,
It's going to be a good couple months here.
and it's not necessarily going to be a healthy time for Israel in
No.
politics and media.
Right.
Let's not forget, we're on the verge of a financial, who knows, with the corona. We were joking about this, but you're already
No.
starting to
Tourism
feel
numbers are
Right.
there's a huge earthquake going on with this corona.
Yeah.
Right.
Financially, it's starting to affect.
Yes,
We were very
yes.
lucky because of Netanyahu not to suffer consequences from the previous international financial crisis that
Right,
occurred.
'cause the
Israel
banks
was
are so
able to get out of this
conservative.
pretty
and
well.
Stanley Fisher at the
Right?
time,
So-
head of Bank of
true.
Israel.
So here right now, we're going to be now on the verge of an international financial crisis. So there are a lot of things that are going to happen. In this case, I think we're lucky. If this is the results of the election and Israel has a stable government, a government that is experienced, and the head of the government who's done wonders here, I think you're going to see this implemented. We're going to see us getting through this economic crisis very well, and the health crisis, whatever happens with that.
But no one's dying of boredom. That's one
yes,
thing we
that's
know for
another-
sure.
Let's take a look also at when this plan was rolled out at the White House, one of the first things that President Trump stated during the press conference, and this was a statement which was then repeated by Jared Kushner, was this might be the Palestinians' last opportunity to get a state, okay? And what the plan does is it puts certain requirements, which we referenced some of them before, on the table, including financial transparency, stopping the payments to terrorists, stopping all forms of incitement, demilitarization, both of the West Bank and of the Gaza Strip.
right.
Dealing with the refugee issue from 48
You know,
that's been
recognizing
sitting
Israel as
there
a Jewish
for
state, ending the
decades.
refugee. So the Palestinians have 4 years to do this in order to get to the final stage of negotiations, which means that nothing is necessarily even agreed upon. But in order to even get to the final negotiations, the Palestinians will have to accomplish these basic requirements, which are requirements of a Western-style
Right.
democracy. And they have to have a democracy with open democratic elections, financial transparency, as we said.
But isn't this all just common sense?
1 second. Now,
should
it
be.
says
Yes and
that they
no.
have 4 years to do that.
That's an interesting
Now,
number.
the 4 years clock started, according to the administration, from the moment the peace plan was rolled out.
Which part of the peace plan?
The,
The economic
from
or
the
the political?
No,
From the press conference?
From the press
Political.
conference that we just had last month. Now, the Trump administration is not planning on losing the election, to the dismay of many Democrats. Now, let's assume for 1 second, just for argument's sake, that the Trump administration wins in November, okay? Now, let's fast forward 4 years from last month. You're going to be in year 7 of a second Trump administration. You'll be in year 7, in which the Trump administration,
Not running for re-election.
Not
man.
running for re-election.
Doing what he wants.
Doesn't care.
right, and what one might hope, or this is reading between the lines, and this is what I heard Ambassador Friedman call the deal within the deal, is that at the end of the 4-year period, if the Palestinians have not met their requirements as laid out in the Peace and Prosperity Vision, that the Trump administration might turn around and say, game over, you lost. And
4 years.
It's not
is
even mine.
so
They will say
long
that.
From now.
They
And
will
then
say
what?
that.
Israel gets all of Judea and Samaria as an Israeli state?
No, we do whatever we want.
then it will be up to discuss. I mean, officially, according to the plan, then those territories which were frozen as being set aside for a potential Palestinian state in the future will revert back to their status under the administration.
Can we
of
watch a
Kogat.
tape of this show in
Don't
4
forget that during
years
the
and
Obama
see what's
administration,
happened?
don't forget
What's
during the
actually
Obama
happened?
administration, they were a 10-month freeze was instituted. The Palestinians did not come to the table until the end of the 10-month freeze, and even then they insisted on an extension of the freeze. It seems to me, and in my opinion, I think that they will probably do the same with this 4-year thing. They won't do a single thing. Maybe in the end they'll start to speak up and
I
But
think
we'll
they'll
see what
wait.
happens internally. I mean, Abbas is probably not
A
going to
lot can
last the
change.
next
A
4
lot can
years.
change.
But I think he'll wait
So-
first if he's still alive because
He will wait. He
he'll
won't do
wait
anything.
till November. They'll see if
Sure.
Trump wins. If he doesn't, I think you're going to start seeing a change. But
Okay,
they
who
can't
knows
do
what
it
will
internally.
be.
They're incapable of doing it because it's not a real
it's
cause.
not a goal of theirs. It's not a goal
of theirs. They don't
They
care
said
about it.
4
They're
years
going
is
to try
an
to buy time.
eternity
Yeah, but
here.
then
Who
we-
knows what'll be
listen-
with Jordan, with Syria, with Iran?
Who
I
knows
mean,
what'll be
let's
here
say
in Europe.
Iran goes
Yeah.
crazy and goes nuclear if their government
let them
doesn't
get
die
over
from the
the corona
coronavirus first. I mean, there's just so many pieces here. Erdogan, if he continues to go mad. And there's
Right.
just
Well, a lot can
so
change.
many
I mean,
things
right now
happening
we're
here.
looking, Right now we're looking at developing relations in Northern Africa. So we just
Right.
we talked about Sudan, we talked about Uganda. Now we're probably looking at Morocco will be next.
There was no, that's it.
Yeah.
Bibi was saying there was
Morocco,
another state
Correct.
which they didn't elaborate on.
Most likely
and,
Morocco.
Most likely Morocco?
Correct. And now you're looking at, by the way, the Saudis
they're not a
are opening
player.
up. They've gone obviously from covert to overt. The conference of presidents
Yeah.
was just there. You're looking at
They were
definitely.
But
they were just there,
Egypt's
so-
been very quiet now because they've
Egypt's
got
been
so
quiet.
many internal problems of their own,
Yeah.
like just feeding their people. They grow
Correct.
up by 1 million people a year. So, but I wouldn't check,
That can change just
that
like
can
anything.
change in 1 second.
Well, we saw
The
what
leadership
happened
change.
when.
And Sinai is a big mess, and Egypt's involved there, which no one wants to talk about. But the Sinai
Right.
Peninsula
That's
that
been
we
more-
left
Saudi Arabia
is
can change
ISIS
the Emirates,
central.
The whole Gulf
so,
area can change a lot, including Morocco as
Yeah.
well on that side. So you're talking about a lot of developing relations there. A lot can change within 4 years, and there's no.
this is like a risk game where the
But I think
pieces
we have
on
to
the
look
board
at
are constantly moving.
the next year first, see how they respond
How
to
about a
this.
week?
But yeah, what I'm saying. Yeah, you're a lot can
week.
change in a week. But I don't think we don't have to worry about that. We have to concentrate on first
Strengthening us.
strengthening ourselves, fulfilling this, getting what we can, just
Yeah.
like in 1947. We got what were we
Yeah.
offered at the UN partition plan? A quarter of what
Not
we, our
even
dream-
Jerusalem.
Not even
Contiguous
Jerusalem.
state.
And not
we
even
took it.
Jerusalem.
Would anybody doubt that that was the right thing today? Anybody looking back? Because there were people who told Ben Gurion,
Sure.
don't
do
take it.
Don't do
And I think that and
The
I believe-
Americans had pulled out of the partition plan. They were against
I
us.
still believe to this day that the Europeans and the world did not want. They offered us something they thought we would
Of
refuse,
course.
and we would regret. They didn't want a Jewish state, and they thought we would reject
And nothing's
it.
changed.
And I agree with
Just
you.
their
I
MO
agree
has
with you.
changed.
And now what we have to do is concentrate on getting what we can. The Arabs will screw it up again and leave us to fulfill this because you're asking what the recognition is. Pompeo said already, these are disputed territories. That's the official position of the United States now.
Sure.
Meaning
Yeah.
Israel can claim it.
They're
And I
not
think
per se
that would be the
occupied,
next stage is
And
going
if,
us doing that.
anti-Semitism gets worse around the world, we're going to need a place for
Yep.
the French Jews to come and wherever. I mean,
We're already
we
seeing that.
need to be
American
fighting
Jews.
that. We're already seeing that. I don't, look, we want people to make Aliyah because they want to live here, like we all did. I mean, nobody forced us out of our homes. We came here because we wanted to be a part of the greatest thing that happened to the Jewish world for sure, but I'm not so sure not that it wasn't one of the greatest things that's happened to the world, period, was the creation of this
I can
Jewish,
say my
the
family came
recreation of
here.
the Jewish state.
This year will be
And,
100 years since my family came here to Afghanistan. They heard that Jews were returning.
Your mom's side,
They
yeah.
came to see if this was indeed occurring, picked up the family and moved from Afghanistan
how's your
exactly 100
Pushtan?
years ago.
We just
Can you
had
speak it? Pushtan? How's
we
your
just
mom?
had
Your
My
mom
mom
does?
does,
Really?
yeah.
Mom, please.
several weeks ago. We just had leaders from all over the free world coming to Jerusalem to commemorate the 75th liberation of the concentration camp Auschwitz. It was interesting because on the one hand, those leaders did not really liberate Auschwitz. In fact, it was the Russian army that liberated it in their war against the Germans, and
That's why the
they
focus was on
happened
Russia.
upon what they thought was a military base. And it was
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, what is going on over here? And that was when
Right.
it was liberated. But to see all those world leaders in Jerusalem, which now you understand, and they understand that it is only the state of Israel that can prevent a Holocaust from happening. Again, that there was no Western power that was willing to send their planes over to bomb the train tracks leading into Auschwitz, let alone bombing the camp itself. That only the state of Israel can do that.
Who among them are intervening now in Afghanistan and in Iraq against the Yazidi, to defend the Yazidi or the Christians?
Who are
When you're
getting-
weak, nobody comes to your defense.
But I think we also have to realize, you have to open the Bible. It's not just about having a secure and safe place.
Agreed.
This is home. It's always been home. And you open up the Tanakh, you open up the Bible, and what you just said about people descending on Jerusalem, the prophets said it a long time ago. And we're seeing all of this come true, and it's just,
Well,
sit with it.
ascending to
It is
Jerusalem.
just, ascending to Jerusalem, right, descending on, ascending to. It's just like, wow. This really
I don't
just,
even
wow.
think they imagined. Let's look at, and I give credit to Netanyahu. The past 10 years has been the golden age of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. We've reached heights that we have never in our entire history.
Hopefully the best is yet to come.
I agree with you, and I think the best is yet to come. And I think that when you look at it, even the prophets would come down here and say, wow, we couldn't even imagine how wonderful this country
Well,
is.
because of the traffic, I wish they just, the
stuck in
infrastructure had
traffic.
preceded the ingathering of the
There's
exiles.
so many
Aside from
challenges
that.
that we face. I mean, there's global anti-Semitism. We still have Iran, racing towards nuclear weapons and embedding themselves in Syria.
right.
The region is in flux. The Western world is very much in flux. I mean, the polarization of politics that we see in Israel is taking place all over the world.
Right.
The holiness of the European Union as a complete entity is very much threatened. The political situation in the United States is
The rise of
extraordinarily-
imperialism among certain, among Russia and obviously Iran and Turkey again. And those are dangers that we have to keep
You
an eye
mentioned
out for.
the global economy and China, and there's so much happening, and the fact that the state of Israel is strong and only getting stronger is a miracle. The fact that Israel is a democracy in which Jewish people, for the first time in their history in these last 70 years, get to pick their leaders, and when we have
3 times
challenges,
in 1 year.
when we have challenges,
Like we
though-
did today.
We're really enjoying it, aren't we?
But you know what? When you have challenges, the mandate gets returned to the voter, and that's there's something very healthy in that and very beautiful in
Yeah.
that. And look, the state of Israel has been blessed with very special leaders, some better than others, some worse than others, but
And very special
very-
common people too.
Sure, and we are very much leaders are a reflection of the people. I've always said that.
Oh, really? I
Um,
hope not.
Israel's always been a steady ship in rough waters, and we continue to be that steady ship. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah,
more
look at
people recognize that.
Look at the situation here right now.
Yeah.
It's all in all, but
And
any
we
of us want to live anyplace else?
And we don't take it for granted.
Yeah.
You know, again, having just been in the States, one of the things that's hurting me so much about America is I think a lot of the American youth take their country for granted. They
Oh,
don't realize
absolutely.
what a great country
well, I'll tell
it
you
is.
why. Because the American
And
youth don't serve in the army. They don't fight
That's
for their
part
country.
of it. But
no
there's a sense of
nationalism anymore. They
entitlement.
don't
And
care.
here in Israel, we don't have that because we know how hard we work for this every single day
American
on
youth
every
see
single
America
level.
as a burden to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
That's what Obama had. That was
So-
his whole point. Is that America is a burden. We will bow
Right.
down to the nations. We will be equal to the nations, not greater. And that
You don't
was
have that
totally
here.
wrong.
It's interesting what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah.
Notice this. They moved the embassy. When they gave this plan, what were those naysayers saying? Oh, this is going to cause
Yes.
a war.
Chaos in the
It's
Arab
going to be
world.
chaos.
Riots everywhere.
When did we have terrorism?
Never
When did we
remember.
have violence? When did we have
When we're
undermining?
weak.
When we,
Barely
with
react.
When we
Oslo, when we
capitulate
gave
and
them
we're
everything,
weak.
when we
They've
put
always been
no
wrong.
demands on them,
Right.
when they had nothing to do.
And who is saying that? All the pundits and all the experts. And my point has been, again,
The experts.
Makubsky and all these Ross, they've been wrong consistently. They have built a career
Right.
on being wrong
But they-
about the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Because they
for
don't
many years.
understand the mentality here in the
understand it.
Middle East.
Correct.
When you respect
Correct.
yourself, people
They're
respect
always,
you.
and they're
It's
always
that
the fear
simple.
that they're putting, oh, it's going to, everything, if we don't do this, if we
Right.
don't give them a state, if we don't put them in here, everything's going to fall.
Everything's
And on the contrary,
intimidation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
everything is working out nicely now because they understand that there are consequences for their behavior. They gave them a carte blanche. They gave them to do everything, and they had nothing to worry about. You violate Oslo, there's no consequence for that. They continue giving them. Let's give them some more. Let's release more prisoners.
Enough.
And so far, he has employed common sense. It's a simple thing. That's all Trump has done. When you look at this agreement, it's not genius. It's been made genius because of all those pundits, because they keep saying it, and so you think, oh my God, why does he's changing the world? No, it's simple common sense.
Correct.
They
It's
recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel
Yes,
because
common
it is.
sense.
That,
It is.
Because it's been that
It's
way.
always been.
They recognize that Israeli sovereignty over the Golan because why would
Because that
we
makes
give the
sense for Israel.
Golan to
Right.
a non-state? And Israel's been sovereign over that
Right.
territory.
Much
they have
longer
been.
than Syria was.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, they recognize that Jewish rights to live in Judea and Samaria. I mean, we're called Jews because we live in
Judea.
Judea. You know, people that want for Jews to not live in Judea, they want for the only region in the world called Judea to be Judenrein, to be Jew-free. That's what
Yeah.
they want. You know,
This is the first administration that does not call for moral equivalence between Israel and the Palestinians.
Because
There's no equation.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. In any case, the Netanyahu administration and the Trump administration work very, very closely together. I know for certain that the ambassador from the United States to Israel, David Friedman, is on the phone multiple times a week with the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer.
Sure.
These administrations work very, very closely together, and it's a unique opportunity for Israel to have an administration that is so seemingly pro-Israel and to have the administration in Israel that's willing to work hand in hand with that American administration.
With shared values
Shared
of
values.
democracy and freedom of speech.
No, we have-
and we are a little island in a very crazy part of the world that shares so many values that the Americans hold dear from all different stripes. And that's hugely important to
And
remember
now
as
it's
well.
not only Israel and the United States. Britain have a stable government right now as well. They went through elections, and they have one that also cooperates
Right.
with Trump. Europe surprisingly came to Israel's side in this whole issue with the International Court. Surprisingly, even Germany stood up in defense of Israel. Australia,
Saying that.
Eastern European countries. You're having more and more countries falling in line because the United States is showing leadership. Trump is showing American leadership, which is very important. The world wants a leader, and he understood that. And so it's not only an issue of Israel. This is all international. We're on the right side here. And it's time, hopefully, a lot of American Jews will understand
of
that
course,
as well.
we still have
Most
challenges.
don't seem to.
We still have challenges with regard to trying to maintain bipartisanship in the United States. It should not only be a Trump administration that is very
That's
strongly
more
pro-Israel.
Right.
And at the same time, also, we must acknowledge that many of our Jewish brothers and sisters living in the United States do not see the political spectrum
No.
the way we see it. It's a
Right.
different lens, and we have got to
Right.
do a lot of work to try to explain why we feel the way we
Yeah.
do
That's a growing trend.
to American
Yeah,
to
that's
American
worse.
Jew, right? And
Yeah.
also to sort of
Yeah.
understand, what makes American Jews feel the way they do about their own political leanings, and try to bridge the gaps.
As much as possible.
Because there are definitely elements that are trying to poke the finger in their eyes and of sore points and create a rift and it's
You just
really.
had two YU students took a knee during Hatikva, I believe.
No, it was Brooklyn College
Brooklyn College?
students that came to Yeshiva University,
Came to Yeshiva University?
and took a
Well,
knee
because
during.
Starting to see
it's
this.
trendy
Yeah,
and in to be
Yeah.
anti-Israel, and
Yeah.
that's something we've got to fight
But, yeah,
against.
we have a lot of
But
work to do in
I
that.
still think a lot of American Jews support the state of Israel. I think
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I was just at APAC. I mean, there's thousands of people there who love Israel. It's such an empowering experience on that level.
They know something very simple, and I used to
I
say
hope
this
so.
back in the 80s and 90s when I was there, and I would say to them, look, it's just by a fluke of history that we ended up here in Israel, and sometimes they took a different boat and they ended up in the United States. So they know us. We're no different from, they know their children, they know our children. They know, if they wonder about what is Israeli soldiers doing, what would your son or daughter do if they were in the same situation? So if you trust
I'm
your
not so
children,
sure
you can,
I agree with you
no,
on
no.
that.
If they trust their children, they can trust us as well. They have to know
I don't
that if
know.
we're doing certain things that they question, they have to understand there must be a reason for
At
it.
the same time, that
I'm
they
not
should
so
know,
sure you're
at
right,
the same
Danny.
time that they
You
should
just
know
When
that
I'm not right
that.
historically, they could have ended
No,
up. They
I'm
could have been
talking
Israelis
about.
themselves.
I'm talking about now. The connections are getting frayed, and they have to be
But
worked
then
on
again,
very hard.
it's not our problem. We can't sit here and
No, it's
worry
definitely our
about.
problem.
We can't
Absolutely
sit here.
is.
We can't sit here and worry about how they perceive us. We have our own issues to deal with. I'm not going to sacrifice my children to find favor with American Jews, with all
No.
due respect to them.
Of
With
course
all due respect,
we're not
I live
gonna
here
do
in
that.
Jerusalem. I'm the one who lives here. You live in the territories. We live
What did
here.
you just say?
We live in Israel. It's
Oh.
territories.
Danny, I mean,
You
I
did.
think
Jewish
that's
community.
Jewish
a
community gets in the
Judah.
territories.
I'm gonna kick you under the table.
Look, I mean, one of the things that JNS worked so hard to do is to explain the situations in Israel to Jews living in America, and at the same time, we have a very strong bureau in the United States in trying to explain to Israelis the politics that's taking place
That's
in America.
right.
You know, we are divided, as you said, sometimes by chance. But this is also a God-given reality.
But
and
if they
everything
want
goes
to understand how
one second, Danny.
Israelis think, then you have to understand that there are a lot of people who think like me, that with all due respect for them, for us it's a question of life.
Well,
For them it's a question of convenience.
we
with
all-
all due respect.
Right, of course, the
have
situations
to
in which
keep educating.
situations in which people grow up are very much a cloud for one way or the other their judgment, and that is one of the challenges that we have as a people. But even though we are divided by a great sea in between us, the Jewish people will always be united in our hearts and in our souls, because
I
we are
hope so.
all one nation under God, literally. And it's so critically important that we work as hard as we can always to embrace our brethren. I really believe that the opinions that you just expressed are a very minority opinion, because I really think that most Israelis have warm embrace for American Jews, feel very
I
strongly.
have family in the United States. I understand
course, we
that.
all
but
do. We all do.
You have to respect the fact that some Israelis don't have to sit here and worry about what the American
Well,
Jews
then
think or
I
don't.
certainly will agree with you that Israelis don't need to factor in American political preferences when determining what is best, at home. Because first things first, you have to take care of your own neighborhood, and we do that.
Right.
So that's 100% certain. But there's a lot of gaps, a lot that needs to be explained, a lot that needs to be embraced. At JNS, we've been striving to do that, and in fact, by all rights, the statistics and the readership showing that we're doing a very good job, because JNS is constantly growing. I didn't think we'd be doing 3 election specials here in just 1 year, but we already have been doing that. So we're
get
a
back to
regular
our regularly
producers
scheduled
of video.
programming,
And
yeah.
with that, also, I just wanted to note before we sign off that Benjamin Netanyahu just tweeted. I just got locked out on my phone. Nitzachon anak l'ma'an Yisrael. With a big picture of his staff here, that this is a great victory for the people of Israel.
From his mouth.
From his perspective, and we'll see what happens. Again, these are exit polls.
Yeah.
The results
A lot
look
can change.
like Netanyahu is on the hinge of forming a strong nationalist right-wing government, as him and his partners have said.
Right.
We will continue to count the votes in the next hours and in the next days ahead.
Yeah.
And with that, I'd really like to thank all of my panelists, Danny Seaman, Eve Harow, Israel Kasnett, Sasha Gorev, our producer who's been working hard tonight, and a special shout out also to Tamima, my daughter, who's been helping with all the setup and everything else, and specifically to all the JNS staff, the publishers, the editors, the writers, and to all the viewers at home. Thank you for tuning in. We've been privileged to bring this to you, and we hope to continue to update you about all the concerns affecting the Jewish world, both in Israel, the United States, and around the world for many years to come. Thank you so
Amen.
much. Have a great
Thank you.
night. Good night.
Bye.
until 3 months from now.